Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. So I deleted the whole playlist, the stuff about Daaji and Heartfulness Cult, for the lack of a better word, which I'll discuss in a moment. And I want to explain what happened, what I learned, how I benefited from it. And I want to start off by saying, if you're a member of Heartfulness and you love Daaji and you think he's a legitimate master, and you're reacting to the title, of course you're going to comment with just your reaction. But this video isn't for you. It was never for you. I don't want anything to do with you or Daaji or the system. I'm not connecting with the system in any way, shape, or form. The videos are for the people who are having severe doubts and don't know what to do, right? People who don't want to quit doing the Sahaj Marg practice, they just can't do what this thing is that Daaji's created called heartfulness. So this is for people who want to do Sahaj Marg, don't want to quit their practice, got so much out of what was the system under Chargy, and a few people have showed up who are, I've had two people, I think, that had this situation. One person was having severe doubts. I think it was a woman in Europe, somebody from Europe, and a Indian woman who lives in America, who contacted me and sent a long message about the scams, some of the real estate scams and things, and some of the things she's experienced. And people who have been burnt by Daaji and the system, and they have, everyone has doubts. I mean, everyone should have doubts, all the old Chargy people who read the books, people who know what the system was about. There's some doubts there. But the issue is, you don't want to quit your practice. Like, there's plenty of people who've quit Sahaj Marg over the years. There's people who quit under Lalaji. There's people who quit under Babaji. There's people who quit under Chargy. And now there's probably plenty of people, maybe more people than ever before, have quit under Daaji. And yet, they miss the meditation, right? And that wasn't an option for me. I am dependent on the meditation, which is clear. I'm dependent on the transmission and cleaning. And so quitting something that you have benefited from, and one of my things that I said was, why should I quit because Daaji sucks? And I'll cover this. I'm going to get a little bit autobiographical. Why should I quit because Daaji and the rest of the people suck? And I'll get to a point in my story. I'll talk about my story, that led up to this, being able to be freed from the shackles of this cult that's been created called heartfulness, that's been an obstacle and burden on my spiritual condition, and just was, so present as I made these videos. Its negative effect towards me, what the negative effect it had on me. And so people are really bumming because they love Sahaj Marg and we're going to continue it. They accepted Daaji as the master, like I did. They had high hopes for him to continue. They thought the thing might expand and, might be some changes, but mostly they'd be, beneficial in some way. And they'd still be able to go to gatherings and still benefit from the system. And then stuff started to happen, and Daaji started to suck, and the system started to suck. And they don't know what to do, right? They don't want to quit because they're tied into the system. So what I found is, and again, this is my story of what I went through to, come to this, like what I went through, what process I went through. And it didn't happen because, I made a decision to leave. Like, I was struggling with it, and I was basically, asking the God or the divine hierarchy, what to do. And it was last Basant when Daaji, lied about, a Whispers of the Brighter World message that he said he received from Babaji. I was making the point, and I was making a video, and this isn't what this thing's about, but, just something I was making a follow-up video yesterday, which I've never, it's only partially done. But I was making the point that, he talked about going to Madame Alin in this clip, that clip from the gathering, where he says that he was struggling with this idea of 100 or 400 masters at some time in the future. And we don't have 400 days. So what are we going to do? We just can't keep on having holidays for every master. But 4 you can certainly have. Like, it was just, so wasn't a problem. He was, and Babaji had already said things in Whispers of the Brighter World. He'd already ruled on this. He already said that these 4 days were important. But he said he was going to Madame Malin and asking her to get a message from Babaji. And then all of a sudden, Madame Malin died, and he was able to receive messages. But why wasn't he able to receive messages beforehand? In fact, he said that he was nurtured in secret behind Charji's back under his nose. And Charji didn't know about it, by the divine hierarchy and Babaji. And yet he wasn't receiving messages then. How did he know he's being nurtured in secret, right? And so why did he need Madame Malin to give him messages if he was a medium himself? This whole thing with Tuktuji and saying he merged with him. But he said he got a message from Babaji saying that, you cancel Charji's and Babaji's birthday, just celebrate Babaji's with Lalaji's and Charji's with Daaji. And that was just a joke and lie. And when I heard that, I knew it was just BS. And I'm like, why am I even doing this thing? This thing's a total joke. And I wasn't feeling the transmission. I was feeling very little from the sittings, and what I felt wasn't great. And my spiritual, my practice was suffering. My condition had suffered the last couple of years specifically. And a lot of that had to do with information. I mean, not just, a lot of that, most of it had to do with Daaji just not being a master anymore. And he was given half-hour sittings, and he was, having concerts and gatherings, and the energy just wasn't there. For many of us experienced this. And also we saw what was going on. And so the idea for these videos that I just made, this playlist, was to present all this information I had. And now I'm looking back at it going, you should have enough information. Like, if you have doubts, it's not about a lack of information. Because I had enough information 2 years ago. I had enough information in 2016. Like, I knew Daaji was a piece of boob. I knew he sucked. And I'll get into that. But what I didn't have was, a way to continue the practice and connect directly. I didn't believe that I could connect directly. And I didn't have a way to continue my Sahaj Marg practice without the organization, right? I thought the organization was essential. And for some period of time it was. Like, I couldn't, reject Daaji and keep on meditating, under the system, because he was the now president and master of the system. And so many of us have struggled with that. But what happened at Basant was, I was waiting for my wife to come home. We were going to eat dinner. And I felt a transmission, like amazing sitting, just a spontaneous sitting. And I hadn't felt transmission like that in like 2 or 3 years, probably since Charji died. Like, my, practice, I guess in India was going well still when Daaji's first year, but Daaji was like a ghost. He wasn't in Chennai. I was in Chennai, and we didn't even see him. And so, the meditations and everything was still going, and Charji, his energy was still present there in Manapakam, the ashram there, in Manapakam. But when I got back to America, it was clear to me that Daaji sucked, and, I didn't know what to do with it. And I, was in denial to some extent, like all these people. And, but eventually it caught up to me with my practice not being great, and the energy not being there, and the heartfulness, the sittings that I wasn't receiving from the Heartfulness app, because I think they just put fake names up there. And even if there aren't fake names, there's just no sitting. It didn't feel like I was getting a sitting. It felt like I was, meditating. It even felt worse, because if you meditate on your own and, you connect directly to whatever extent. But if you're getting a sitting, you expect to be connected through the preceptor. And so if this person doesn't transmit, or doesn't have the ability to transmit, or there's nobody there, and they just put up a fake name, so it feels like you're getting a sitting, but you're not making contact with a real preceptor or anything, which is, I think, the case there. And Daaji's, lost the ability to transmit, or his condition, or he's fallen, whatever. It's even worse. You're better off meditating on your own, because at least you're trying to connect. You're working towards direct connection. And so I wasn't feeling anything, and for a number of years. And then I had this spontaneous sitting, and it wasn't corresponding with anything Daaji was doing. Like he was, it was whatever time during, it was like 5 o'clock at night, 4 p.m., 5 p.m. And there was no sitting going on in India with Daaji, like not even close to that. And so I said, well, this came directly from the divine source, either from Babaji or Lalaji or whatever. But it was a direct sitting to me without the organization, and it was, wonderful. And it was everything I was missing. And so then I'm like, oh, I'm done. And I made an announcement to my YouTube channel, my YouTube viewers, and I was done with it, right? But it didn't come from me just saying I'm going to quit, because that happened a couple of times. And, that was never, well, like, why should I quit? Like, I love Sahaj Marg. Sahaj Marg's changed my life. Why should I be the one to quit? Because they've wrecked the mission, right? These MNFers have wrecked the mission. I already made an audio last night to start on some of this thing, which I get into some of this. But let me go into my story, because a lot of things happened that led up to, me realizing these things. But then, something had to happen spontaneously, or I had to have some, help from above or, within. I had to have some confirmation. And so then once I started to meditate, doing Gratefullness meditation, which you guys are welcome to try here, but it's not a system or an organization. It's just, you having the idea that you're connecting directly. And there's sittings and things there, which you can receive. There's playlists, and you can listen to the playlists, listen to the introductions. If you're an Abhyasi and you're a person who's struggling with Daaji and the, corruption of the system, and you don't want to give up the connectivity that you received, you can try these Gratefullness sittings. But if that doesn't work, you can try to connect directly, on your own, like I did. And you just pray to the, masters to help you with that. And you realize that, Daaji and the Heartfulness Cult have become a, impediment to your ability to connect to the source. Instead of connecting to the source. See, this is why I call it a cult. And, it's not a traditional cult. When you say cult in America, you think of Jonestown and, David Koresh and these things, all these different cult leaders, and, these death cults and things. So, because that's the most graphic. Like when people think of cults, it's something, of a more nefarious nature, right? Something that ends in bloodshed and, all these things. Which, I don't think Daaji thing's going to end. It's more like a corporate cult or a money cult or something. But the way that I define cult is that a spiritual organization is one in which the master or the saint or the organization itself, whatever it is, sacrifice their needs, the person's needs, for the upliftment, the spiritual upliftment of the followers, of the, as Babaji called them, his associates, right? And you saw that with Lalaji, Babaji, and Charji, that their physical needs and their personal free time and their, their energy and, everything that they had, they put into helping other people connect to God. Those of you who knew Charji and Babaji or were around them, this is the case. I mean, it was obvious to all of us. You just had to spend some time with them, and if not, you've reaped the benefit of it, even just from doing the sittings. The transmission you receive in the cleaning, and when you benefited, you saw and you understood where it was emanating from, and even from good preceptors who would sacrifice their free time and would be there for you. Like you had a really good preceptor, and you saw that they were, like it's like somebody who's a helper, that somebody helps you in your life, and they sacrifice and they tolerate and they do whatever they do to help, uplift people. And so that's what Sahaj Marg was. But a cult is a organization, a person in which the master or the president or the leader of the system expects you as the members and followers to sacrifice your needs, sacrifice, your resources to fulfill his desires. Like an example of this is Daaji expecting preceptors to buy his books, like thousands of them, to make him a best-selling author and being pressured by the organization. People I've heard that they've been, they've given 80,000, they've lost 80 grand and, some kind of real estate scams there. Things like that. Again, this is what I've been told. But, you hear these things over and over again, and you see them where the people are expected to sacrifice, their well-being, their resources, their needs to prop up the master and his ego and the organization itself. So therefore religions have become cults as well, right? And in the process, the master is actually an impediment or a block to you connecting with the divine, because you think the religion or the cult leader is going to help you connect with the divine, and he's a blockage, right? He's somebody, this is what religions do. Religions become a middleman between you and the divine. And that's what's happened with heartfulness. I mean, those of us who experienced it. And so, that's what I mean by a cult. And so I miss things about the old Sahaj Marg system. And yet, my practice has gotten better. And everything has flowed naturally. And so I had people who I told about heartfulness. And, I'm going to get into this more as we go through the story. And so I didn't feel comfortable. I wasn't ever recommending things. Like, I don't recommend things because I don't, I talk about, I'm not like an influencer that I talk about things that have been good for me, things that have worked for me. And heartfulness wasn't working for me, and Daaji was doing things that were concerning me. But I didn't want my personal story. I'm going to repeat this because it goes with my story. I didn't want my personal story, my personal interaction with him to negatively affect and block somebody from benefiting from the system, because I didn't know if other people were benefiting from the system, and maybe they still are. I don't know. That's, that's for them to determine. But I knew I wasn't. And so I didn't have the idea that I was going to bring people with me when, this sitting came, but I told everyone about it. And a lot of them say, we're not feeling anything from the sittings either. They had started heartfulness and they had, done heartfulness for a while, but they weren't feeling things from the sittings, and the preceptors thing wasn't working for them. And so they decided, they wanted to try what I was doing, but we were all connecting directly. It wasn't it's always that way. Your spiritual life is always a direct connection. Your spiritual life is always, you do it individually, but collectively. You might be meditating in a group, but you're all having your personal experience. And people go through things, and they have challenges and doubts and things, and maybe they want to quit, maybe, whatever it is. And so everyone has to, do that on their own. And the great thing about this gratefulness meditation that we're doing is, without a living master, without somebody who's going to prop you up, you have to work harder to retain this connection, which is good, because that's been missing in the Sahaj Marg system. It's a flaw because people suck, and I'll get into that in a bit. But we've seen that play out, right? And so let me tell my story here. This is the, what led up to this, and, my own transformation. So I'm going to take a break here, and then I'll eat breakfast, and I'll continue on with that in a moment. So I've covered a lot of this in my Journey series videos, which, on my other channel. And so I want to do as short a version as I can, but, enough so that people who haven't listened to that still get a sense of things. But up until I was 29, when I started the Sahaj Marg practice, I never really understood why I was here on planet Earth. Like, I didn't have a purpose. I didn't buy into the American system. I could see things that I didn't agree with or didn't understand or didn't, the American dream, the idea of normal American life. Like, it just wasn't me. It just wasn't something that I was focused on, securing some kind of job or, whatever it was, wealth and fame. I mean, that was the other kind of part of the dream, or whatever it might be. And having a good materialistic life and enjoying all the things that America had to offer. Like, I just felt at a kind of early age and different times throughout my life that this isn't why I'm here. Like, this is, there's just something missing. It wasn't, I enjoyed some of the aspects of American life, but it was always, there's got to be something more. There's got to be some bigger purpose here than what the American, culture is saying my life should be like. And as I entered my 20s, my friends were all finding jobs and getting married and, living the American dream, and they were migrating to adulthood, and I just, I couldn't get through college. I dropped out of college twice. I couldn't sustain relationships. I was under functioning. I had talents and abilities, but I couldn't do anything for any long period of time. I couldn't stick with things, and I didn't, feel like congruent with whatever my options were. Whenever I tried something, it wasn't congruent to me, right? It wasn't the answer. Part of it was I was in a Rahu period. I did I had a Vedic astrology reading. Rahu was some sort of shadow planet, and I was in a long period of 18 years. From the time I was 10 to the time I was 28, and the guy said he'd never seen a Saturn return like as good as mine. Your Saturn returns every 7 years or something, which had some sort of significance. I don't know very much about this other than what I was told, but that's when I found Sahaj Marg, and I received my first sitting from Fred, my preceptor, and it was transformative. And it was a huge experience. The first 3 sittings, just feeling the transmission. I had tried to meditate before. I'd done some forms of yoga. It really wasn't for me. I had done some New Age kind of things. I kind of liked them, but really wasn't thinking about God or thinking about spirituality, any of these things. Never thought about having a guru or being a part of a system like this. But the transmission convinced me. Then I started to read the books, and I understood the books because I received the sittings, which was kind of like a miracle to me. I realized if I read these books without doing the meditation and getting the transmission, I wouldn't be able to understand them. So I knew that the system was next level, was something, that I could have never imagined existed. And as I applied the teachings, like I read all the books and I enjoyed reading the books and the talks, listening to the talks from Master Charji. And in the first 2 years of my practice, I did my practice the way they say to do it, very regimented, very disciplined practice. And I applied all the teachings that that were applicable to my life whenever it came up, and it all worked, right? I could feel myself evolving and changing. I was able to complete my bachelor's degree. I was able to get through college for the first time, after 3 tries, and then start working in the human service field. And I worked a very tough job as a counselor in a treatment center with young sex offenders, basically. The worst population to work with. It had a high turnover, about 9 months. People didn't last more than 9 months. And I lasted like 2 years. And I was able to do things I'd never done before. I was able to sustain relationships. I was able to, it was like a nutrient, like something was missing, the transmission and the cleaning. There was something missing in my system, and there were blockages that the cleaning took care of, and there was transmission. There was holes in my whatever internal world that I needed the transmission to, like fortify, and it helped me be like a better, complete person, right? And I was, changing and evolving and being able to do things I never did before. I was able to, I always was bored and, the monotony of life and getting through mundane things, and I was able to, sustain things that I couldn't do before. And so it was clear to me the system was a winner. The system was it was the real deal. And now I had a goal, and I liked the goal. And, the master that with the real goal of human life and getting to the, evolving internally and connecting to God internally. And it wasn't something that I would have picked, but once it picked me, I was very grateful for it. And I was grateful for the system. Of course, then I started to go to gatherings and go to India, and I was made a preceptor, and, all these things happened. And it just kept on getting better. And the system just kept on improving over and over again. When I applied the teachings to the system, to my life, it just worked. I wasn't necessarily testing because I believed and had faith in the system. But, these things just made sense and they worked. Even if I didn't kind of understand them at first, I'd later come to realize the wisdom and the efficacy of the teachings and the philosophy and all that. And so after a couple of years, I was made a preceptor. I went to India. And, I was in a area where there was only one other preceptor. They had broken America into, I think, 6 zones, 8 zones, something like that. And I was in a zone with 4 states: New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, and Utah. And there was no preceptors in Utah. There was one in Arizona that moved there later. and there was a couple that was in charge of the region in Colorado, and I was in New Mexico. And I met with a couple who, their marriage was kind of a sham, and they were both looking to get out of it, but they weren't, coming open about that, but they were both looking for an exit strategy. And I ended up being the exit strategy and get pulled into something that, wasn't great. But it was some samskara, and like it was inevitable. And it was a, painful marriage, and, it ended up costing me my preceptorship and some controversial stuff with it that I'm not going to get into now. My ex was a devoted Abhyasi on her level. In many ways more devoted than any other person I knew, but also had deep flaws, from her story of being a survivor of abuse and, sexual abuse from her dad and physical and mental abuse from her mom, and had big psychological problems, and spent time in a hospital, attempted suicides, self-abuse, cutting, hysterical. I mean, these are the things she told me. She had hysterical blindness, where she went blind for a while because of an emotional reaction. And somebody who I didn't quite understand in the beginning. I mean, she told me she was broken, but I really didn't understand what that meant. But she was a person I later, there's a great quote about this. Somebody who was just, everything about her was to make herself the victim. She lived life to, her internal world was to construct everything around her to have heroes and villains, where the hero was there to rescue her, which I was in the beginning of our relationship, and the villain was there to make her feel like a victim, which I was at the end of her relationship. This was our relationship. This was the thing she went through internally, her process, right, where she had, heroes and heroes and villains, and she always had people that she would appeal to rescue her from the villain that she was creating out of her own, whatever. She was manifesting out of her own victim consciousness. The victim stance is a powerful one. The victim is always morally right, neither responsible nor accountable, and forever entitled to sympathy. And I didn't really fully understand this. And, I made the same mistake with Daaji years later, where I believed the higher would always work out. That if somebody was a good Abhyasi, or they did the system to whatever extent, they did their practice and they were part of the system, that their higher nature would win out. We have an ego and we have a soul. And when you do the Sahaj Marg system, your soul gets activated. And you go through this yatra process, and the soul is enhanced with the transmission and cleaning. And if done properly, the system inevitably minimizes your ego. Your ego gets balanced out. Your ego maybe is won over by the love that your soul feels for this, this process. And your ego surrenders to your soul and the spiritual journey that you're on, right? And now that I see it years later, I realize that almost never happens to anybody who does Sahaj Marg. It certainly doesn't happen to most people in the world. Most people are ego-driven, right? I wrote a book, A Soul-Driven Existence. To become a person with a soul-driven existence is a very rare commodity. And to be all in 100%, where your ego is 100% backing your soul's path, and everything you do is to move forward spiritually and to serve God, is a rare occurrence. It's happened with the first three masters of the Sahaj Marg system. It happened with a handful of people who do the Sahaj Marg system, but everyone else, failed. And lots of those people are actually sucky and don't believe in the system. And I didn't understand that back then. Not that the Sahaj Marg system isn't wonderful. It's just that people suck. And maybe in a future life, right? This is a long game. Like, this is a short life of 70 years. Your soul's eternal. You do three lives as a Sahaj Marg Abhyasi, and maybe it's a different story. Maybe even your next life. I don't know. But for my ex, she was somebody who I had always hoped that and thought that the spiritual side would win over. And I thought the damage done by her childhood, I had worked with kids like this. I worked in a couple of treatment centers. I went back and got my master's degree in counseling, and I worked in another treatment center with adolescent sex offenders. And I worked with outpatient, whatever, clinic and things. And people are wrecked. People get wrecked by their abuse, by their history. And so I thought, she was doing well, giving whatever her history was. And I thought it would win out. But what I didn't understand was and this is essential to the story with Daaji Kamlesh and what happened later on. That's why I'm including this. But what happened was that, and I only realized after we were separated, that because of her victim consciousness, she never did the first thing that you have to do as an Abhyasi. The first thing you have to do as an Abhyasi, and it's in the Maxims number 5 and number 7, the first one more importantly. Take miseries as divine blessings for your own good and be thankful. And number 7, be not revengeful for the wrongs done by others. Take them with gratitude as heavenly gifts. And this is something my ex, with always being in a victim stance. I worked with these kids who were sex offenders, and they would have this thing called the assault cycle they had to work through. They had to figure out what their assault cycle was. And the cycle was the behaviors that they would go through when they felt victimized. Like in every abuser, there's a victim, and every victim, there's an abuser. And, I know this all too well from, not only my professional work, but what I dealt with my ex. And it's the victim stance that gives the person permission to enter into this cycle of abuse and behave in a certain way. And when a person feels like a victim, what that victim statement I read, the victim stance, here, I'll just read this again here. The victim stance is powerful, and the victim is always morally right, neither responsible nor accountable, and forever entitled to sympathy. And so when you're like that kind of person, you can't be an Abhyasi. Because the essence of Sahaj Marg is your present was created by your past. Everything that's happening in your present was created by your past. And everything that's happened in your future is being created right now in your present. The choices you've made, of course, samskaras is a big part of that. All your samskaras you brought in from a previous life. And that your soul has mapped out a plan. And if you do the Sahaj Marg system, there is a consciousness that's activated between your soul and the master of your system, a treatment plan, and your life unfolds in such a way that you have the best opportunity, giving you opportunity after opportunity to move forward and connect with your soul. And so there's no victims. You can't be a victim and do well in the Sahaj Marg system. You can't view yourself as a victim. You can't, you have to accept what comes to you. As hard as it is for all of us, taking a victim stance is poison to your abhyas. And it was the centerpiece of how my ex lived her life. She was a perpetual victim. And so she was never really an abhyasi because of those reasons. She might have liked the teaching, she might have liked the transmission, whatever she felt, that's great. But as long as you're going to constantly frame your narrative in the idea that you're a victim and not look at it like, oh my God, I'm going to be grateful for everything that's coming to you. Because gratitude is the culmination of anything, right? The 5 stages of grief end with acceptance, right? The psychological model of the 5 stages of grief, which, is pretty accurate, except it's gratitude. Acceptance is not the end. Gratitude is always the end. When you're eventually grateful for something, that's why, it's called Gratefullness meditation, the name that I've given what we're doing here, being grateful for all the things that eventually leads to your spiritual evolution. And so there was this, hellish life that I had. And at some point, was one of my finer moments, better moments. I went through this process where my ex basically told me that she couldn't confront her past. She couldn't fix what was inside her. She said to me something to the effect that if she did that, she feared that she would be schizophrenic and be locked up in a psych ward. Like she couldn't do it. She couldn't look into the abyss of her abuse and these things and fix the problem. And, there was feeling bad for her that way or whatever. But I was kind of past that given our circumstances with our kids and our life, which was falling apart. And her sabotaging everything that we were trying to do. And I didn't really fully understand this till later. That she, no matter what we tried to do to improve our situation, she was always sabotaging it. Because she always had to be the victim, right? And so I was thinking about it. Like, this is my life, right? This is, sometimes we'd have these arguments. Well, let me come back to that. Well, let me just say that here. So when we had arguments, she would flip out. She would punch herself in the legs and say, "This is what your words are doing to me." And she would get knives and threaten suicide. She had been locked up for attempted suicide. She had a psychiatric hold, I think, twice in her life, as in college and things. And she was a self-abuser, a cutter, someone who took knives and cut herself. And we would have normal arguments, and some of them were caused by me in the beginning. I was more forceful, and I was pretty overwhelmed and stressed out, and I don't want to say caused by me because some of the reactions, but as we moved forward with our relationship, this is that finer moment. I realized that my life sucked and it was going to suck. I thought about divorce. I thought about all the options that were on the table, and they really weren't options because my ex was so unstable that I couldn't leave her alone with the kids. And if there was divorce, she would more than likely get custody. And not that I was great, but I couldn't leave the kids alone with somebody that was this psychologically unstable. And, it wasn't the Sahaj Marg way. It wasn't really an option. I mean, it wasn't a possibility. And so I did something that is unusual for me. And I just decided I am not going to think about this and how bad it sucks for me. I am just going to be grateful and positive and, do everything in my power to be really positive and loving to my ex, just be really loving. And it's something that she said she wanted. And at times she did, but that's when she turned on me, which weirdly enough, when I, gave her what she said she wanted, which was basically, my version to the best of my ability of unconditional love. And that was the beginning of the end of our relationship, of me, being loving and not, just sacrificing my own personal happiness to just prop her up in the family and keep the family going. And I did my best when she was trying to bait me into fighting, having arguments. I would just try to ignore her, and because I could see it. It was a pattern of behavior, like she needed it, which always ended up with if you haven't lived with this, you would never understand it. But when you live with somebody who uses suicide as a threat, it's and just self-abuse, and you're just walking on eggshells. They have these psychological breakdowns, and anything could trigger them. And we'd have these arguments, and I'd have to go hide the knives. There was a time where she took a knife, and we had this old broken down barn. The kids called it an old broken down barn. It was probably November in Virginia in the mountains. It was probably 30, 40 degrees outside, cold. And she was shirtless. She was topless. I had to go retrieve her. My son ended up coming with me, which I kind of regretted. But I had to go find her, and I found her. She had no shirt on. She had a knife pressed to her sternum, and she was rocking back and forth like she was possessed by and some of it seemed to be performative. Some of it I thought, she was acting. And then, my daughter, Anna, started to copy these behaviors. They had a very, they had an animosity. They had a lot of animosity between them, the two of them. Although Anna had abilities that were, she was intuitive and things. And at one point, my ex decided that she should mediate our relationship fights. And I said, that's a horrible idea. You can't put a 10-year-old kid, 11-year-old kid, or maybe 12, I don't know. She was like that age. She was probably 12, 11, 12. In the middle of adult fights, it's ridiculous. But somehow it happened because, I couldn't stop it. And then Anna started to copy the behaviors. Before that, when we'd have these arguments, I did my best to keep the kids out of it. They could hear the things. And, these things would go on for days, even weeks. And they were draining. I can't tell you how bad I would feel. Like anything, any joy, any, positive feeling, any serotonin, any, even with the cleaning and the system, I just felt lifeless. And I don't even want to call it depression because it was even worse than that, right? Just, complete bleak, like a bleakness that the life and energy would get sucked out. And, I came up with different, because I worked as a counselor, so I came up with solutions and exit strategies that I'd worked with these kids to get out of the cycle. And I came up with all these proposals on how to stop these arguments from escalating. But my ex rejected all of them. She wouldn't adhere to them. She would, because she wanted to be a victim. So she just, and whatever, like I said, or whatever, transpired, it would always be that which she would remember. She wouldn't remember what it was like to be on my end. And, I didn't have anybody because I couldn't talk to people about it. Because if I talked to people about it, they would say, you got to get out, right? Because no one in the right mind would stay in a relationship like that. So I couldn't talk to people. I didn't have an outlet, whatever. And again, I'm not a victim here. I'm not claiming to be a victim. I'm just saying this is what I was dealing with. And so then my daughter started to cut herself and, exhibit these behaviors. And they both threatened suicide to get what they want. And the problem with, there's, lots of problems with that. But, when you're in a situation where somebody's threatening suicide, like my daughter when we were in India and we went to renew our visas in Sri Lanka, she wanted to be on Facebook and we weren't comfortable with social media. But she said she would commit suicide if she wasn't allowed to go on Facebook. And so, it becomes this manipulative tool, and somebody who does things that shows, the possibility of self-abuse and suicide, you have to take that seriously. And you can never say, go ahead and do it. Stop using it as a tool to threaten and manipulate me. Because then if you do it, you feel guilty and, it's on you, right? It's a horrible situation to be in. And I lived with that for a number of years. And just the weird behaviors, like, another example is there was a time where my ex was always trying to find new cures and things. Of course, never looking at the central problem, which is the victim consciousness. And she started to drink her own urine as a medicine. The idea here is that you only need one thing to be a system of excreting your waste, which is, pooping or peeing, right? And so one of them must be medicine. Like, that's the theory. That's the theory I was presented, because you don't need two. And so she started to drink her urine, and she wanted the kids to drink the urine. And this was a time where I was, realizing walking on eggshells. But eventually, she had these jars of urine sitting in the bathroom, and she was trying, I was thinking about how that's going to affect the kids. My youngest son has come to me and said, we were talking about it. He remembered, this being something that she had pitched to him as a thing that, like, as an 8-year-old kid or, whatever he was at that time, that he should do. And, and so eventually I had to say, look, you can't do this anymore. Like, this is the kind of thing that social services would take away. Your child protective services will take away your kids. You can't be telling them to drink urine. This is, you can lose your family over this kind of thing, right? You can't, and damaging to the kids, whatever. So we had some kind of argument that led to her flipping out like usual. And I was trying to avoid that, and, all of it. But I'm doing the edited version here, but I'm just giving a kind of painting a picture of the situation. But she blamed me because she was saying, like, she was getting better physically, but I made her stop drinking her pee, so it was my fault that she was sick or whatever. This is stuff I live with. And, she was on all these medications. She was having one physical issue after another. Adrenal fatigue collapse. She had a thyroid issue, and the medication was never right, so she was always under-medicated. And if she was under-medicated, she would flip out. The symptoms were always the same: emotional, crying, emotional instability, and all these other things. And, so we had some success. The kids were being homeschooled. Some of it worked well for them. They, we were in India in the flood. The kids performed in ways that other people noticed and complimented me and their ability to survive, difficult circumstances. And, they had been prepared for some of these things growing up at the farm. They learned to milk cows. So there were some successes. And we had some family successes. But, we lived in a house where the former owner had committed suicide. And we weren't told by our realtors what had happened, because it had been flipped. Some guy bought the house and then flipped it, so they didn't have to tell us that it was a suicide house. But later, a realtor who was this woman's friend, and she thought she was murdered, said that she took a realty course. She was becoming a realtor, and they used the example of our house sale as an unethical behavior. And there was a spot in the living room where the finish of the floor had been scrubbed off, because the woman had shot herself in the head and her blood was in this patch, and we never knew why this floor was different than the rest. She had 60 cats, and when we first got in there, the place smelled of some kind of pine sol and stuff they put on it, but eventually the whole house smelled like cat pee. And we were later told that there was people suspicious were believing she was murdered. Her friends were, part of a group of women like these, Miss Marple, whatever, like murder solving Agatha Christie women who were trying to break, to get rid of a dog catching. There's these people who were catching loose dogs and then selling them to pharmaceutical companies to be tested on. And the sheriff was involved, and a guy that lived across the street from us was involved, and these women were trying to stop it. And they were making a lot of money, and these women were believing that she might have been murdered by one of them. Her boyfriend came over, and he had a temper tantrum. He had a bad temper, and he came in and took the answering machine out of the house after it was ruled that she had committed suicide. And she was in the Hemlock Society, which is into poison or whatever. I don't know what exactly that is. And she shot herself, which seemed weird. And then people showed up. Other people said, "Oh, there's energy in this house, is very intense, and it might be haunted." And my ex, she talked to some psychic years later, and the psychic said there was like a negative entity, and she was, working on removing the entity. And the only reason that I believed that this happened was I was in the basement where the woman said she felt the entity, and I felt like something like passed through me. Like I didn't, my ex was in this conversation. I was like, oh my God, because it was just to me another crazy thing. Not that psychics aren't real, but there's so many fraudulent ones and all these things. But I had this experience. Me and my son were down there, and we both felt like some kind of presence, like something there, and then it was removed. And like I have a whole stories about this haunted house and things we endured. And so it was an intense place, right? Some guy showed up to buy our basketball hoop. We were selling our basketball hoop, and he came and he said, "Oh, I have this device that tells if you're on a ley line. I think you guys are on a ley line." And he pulled out these things, and he said, "Oh yeah, you guys are on a ley line, which is a spiritual hot point." And we had preceptors who come to our house, and they loved the energy there. The land had nice energy, but sometimes the house was like, it was unstable. And that just exacerbated the whole situation, right? Which also led to me believing that if we were in a calmer, better environment, that maybe some of these things wouldn't be going on. That was some of my hope, my false hope, right? And so we ended up selling the farm and going to India, looking for a community to do the homesteading. And we had some things to offer in terms of what we had learned from the homeschooling. And I'd done a lot of this etheric gardening where you connect with the spirit of the plant. And, obviously now with the stuff that Daaji's doing with, the Forest of Heartfulness, this thing all could have been valuable. Like we were doing these things years before everyone else. And we were doing things, I was doing the YouTube channel, which was based in the teachings of Whispers of the Brighter World, and, looking into some of these claims about money power and some of the, conspiracy theories that Daaji presents, things that are called conspiracy theories, but they're not if they're true, right? They're not theory. And, things that Daaji hints at, that Babaji hints at in Whispers of the Brighter World. Daaji's, a mainstream person. And so I investigated and, learned all these things and became a, prominent member of this idea of the truth community and alternative media here. And because of that, and, all these other things. But we went to India seeking, where do we go from here? Because our situation was unsustainable. So we met with Kamlesh. He was going to be Sarji's successor, and he, just sort of chewed us out in front of our kids. Most of it was aimed at me, and it was just kind of poorly handled. Like, kind of stupid things he said were not based in reality. And I went there to present all this information I had to offer, right? Things we had learned from this experiment, even with all the chaos and the, psychological issues, we had accomplished some things. And we had information about, the transition that people are going to go through. I mean, if you're an Abhyasi, you should believe in Whispers of the Brighter World. If you believed in Charji endorsed this book. And maybe Charji was wrong, but I've had experiences with Whispers, I'm not going to go into, but, I was reading them on a different level. I was going through kind of a trauma and physical issues, and I fasted, and I was just bedridden. I was reading Whispers like a lot, and I read it on a completely different level. It's like I penetrated to a higher level of spiritual consciousness for that period where I was fasting. And, I look at this book, Flowers of Algernon, where this guy had mental disabilities, and he was given this drug, and there was a mouse called Algernon who was given the drug, and it made him like a genius. But eventually the mouse died, and he started to, deteriorate, right? The guy did. He started to get stupid again. It was kind of an interesting, I watched the movie and read the book when I was in high school, but a very interesting story. And, that's like how I felt. Like I was perceiving reality on a much higher level. And it was through I was understanding whispers to be something beyond what I had understood to be it before. And I've experienced the validity of the teachings. But there are these prophecies about the collapse of civilization. These prophecies are also there in Babaji's Reality at Dawn. And they're not just prophecies. They're things that Babaji was ordered to do in his diaries. He was ordered to transform the world and bring about the end of this dysfunctional system. And if you don't believe that, then you don't believe in the Sahaj Marg teachings. If that's something that makes you uncomfortable, yeah, sure, I understand why that's the case. But that's what it says. You either believe in the system or not. You don't cherry pick, either they're telling you the truth or they're lying, right? And my family and I believed in them, and we were preparing for that, or preparing our kids for a future with these upheavals, when one is supposed to take place next year at the end of 2025, 2026, according to the Whispers of the Brighter World, right? And so we had things that I felt were there to offer, but Daaji just did this sloppy, chewing out. I don't know what it was about. But it had benefits because my ex couldn't blame herself because that wasn't in her DNA. And she couldn't blame Daaji because he was Kamlesh because he was the next master. So she had to blame me. And that inevitably led to our divorce, which was just a complete mercy and benefit for me at the end of the day. So that was a blessing in that way, just the way it worked out. And so I didn't hold Kamlesh responsible for how badly he handled it, because ultimately it said about a cleaning. And I went through a very intense cleaning, which was also a blessing, which Kamlesh was a part of. But now I want to get into the part where I realized that he was a dud, where the information was presented to me. So, years ago, I was concerned when I heard about all the people who reject Charji as the master, that I would do that to the next guy. And I didn't want to do that because I wanted to do Sahaj Marg because it was great, and I didn't want to be a problem. I understood how people felt about Babaji and why they rejected Charji. But, this is, everyone who knows the literature understands how bad that was. It was really bad. So I prayed to God to show me the next master and that I would have a good relationship so I would be able to make the transition. I knew the transition might be hard for me. It happened to so many other people, right? And it was hard for the new master because he wasn't a master yet, and people knew him before he was a master because it was obvious the issues. So I made this sankalpa that I would be able to, I prayed to God, and I had this intention to be able to prepare for this inevitability. This is back in 1997 or so. I started in 1993, and I was at the airport. Charji made a couple of spontaneous visits to Texas. I don't know, they're buying land there for a retreat center. I don't know what's going on. But he just showed up in America, and people are like, oh, everyone Charji's in Texas, and if you want to come to a gathering, everyone just jumped on a plane and went there. And so I was in New Mexico at the time, and, I got on a plane and showed up there. We were waiting for him at the airport, and everyone was gathering around the gate, and I never felt comfortable with that. I was always, on the outskirts. I didn't want to bug them, whatever. The way that people would follow him through the airport, I never felt comfortable with that. The guru culture. And someone came up to me, sort of behind me on the side and offered me some popcorn. And I looked up, and it was Kamlesh, and we knew each other a little bit. And I said, no thanks, I'm not a popcorn eater. And I looked at him, and I had a spiritual experience. So I was like, wow, I think Kamlesh is in the central region. I mean, it was a spiritual experience, like where I was, like something happened. And so I always had a high opinion of them from then on. And then years later, I was there when he transitioned. I lived where I had to walk by his flat, his apartment, by the meditation hall in Chennai in Charji's last, year of life, his last 6 months of life. And me and Kamlesh would pass each other. And I could feel the energy building. I could see that he was becoming more and more the master. I could perceive the work on some level. I could tell that he was, like you could feel the difference. And so I returned to when Charji died, my family and I were in Hyderabad. And we heard when we were on the train, and we came back like a week after he passed away. And it was like, I think the first satsang that they were going to have after the funeral and all these things. And I walked into the ashram with Kamlesh. And I always like to walk. I always like to be at the meditation hall before the preceptor or the master came into the hall. It just made me feel good to see them come in, especially the master or Kamlesh when he was Charji's successor. And I wanted to pass him. I'm not an etiquette person. I'm not a guru person. I'm not a respectful person. But there was something there that made me uncomfortable with passing him while he was walking. He was walking slowly, and I wanted to, speed up ahead of him. But something was stopping me from doing that. But I wanted to get to the meditation hall before he did to see him come in and all these things. It was the first sitting. It was all kind of a big deal. And I just knew you could feel he was the master. And I just couldn't, it was just something different, right? And so I fully accepted him. I saw the work that was done. But I had these various bad experiences with him. There was a time where he was up in his office, and it was the first time I think I saw him since we returned to India after he chewed me and my family out. And I saw him up there, and I said what I just said to you, that I always was happy to see him when he walked into the ashram. My heart would feel something when I see the preceptor, and particularly him or Charji, walk into the ashram. And particularly him now, because it meant that the line of succession would continue. My heart felt good about it. And so I told him that, and he got happy, and, he said, I have these gardens, these container gardens, I want you to, maybe you can do something with them, because he knew I was a farmer and these things. And so I planted some organic tulsi seeds and started doing some of the etheric gardening where you connect with the soul of the plant. And my tulsi seeds, the tulsi plants grew incredibly. So much so that when his secretary came up and he said, Kamlesh is really impressed by your tulsi plants. Do you have any extra seeds? And so I went and brought them to him at his office. And there was a time where I had written this book that, verbalizes some of these truther narratives in the book, The Choice. And, Charji had blessed it. It was a whole thing. And a young Abhyasi who worked with Kamlesh, a young woman, had read the book and had lots of questions about it. And then we talked about it, but she had more questions. I said, yeah, we can talk later some other day. And then I saw her, and she was like, something had happened where she was like, oh, I don't believe, like she was told that my book was garbage, whatever. And I heavily learned that came from Kamlesh. And a few days later, I went into maybe the next day, sometime around that, I went to give Kamlesh his tulsi seeds. I still had some of these organic tulsi seeds. And I went in his office, and this woman came in with a young man she was working with. They were working on a project. And Kamlesh started to basically tell me, in a sort of subtle way, that I was stuck in 0.5, and 0.5, all these points have they can become inverted. And if you're in 0.5 because of the emotional nature, this is the point, in the throat area, that you hallucinate, right? And so he was telling me I was hallucinating. And it was because he, heard about the stuff I was believing in the book, and this was his reading of the situation, which, there's millions of people. I mean, it's 1/3 of the population here in America, and then globally, that subscribe to the, things I put in the book. Believe, at least on some level, some of these things. Like, we're not all crazy, right? But he is such a mainstream and limited person, that's the way he read it. And I was shocked. And he did it in such a heavy-handed, I tried to change the subject, but he said, no, you got to hear this. He said that, he said it again, because the other piece to this is, he's telling me that I'm in 0.5 and it's inverted, which wasn't true. But if it was true, what am I going to do about it? Like, you're saying I'm hallucinating. You're basically saying I'm crazy. And like, what am I going to, like, what happened? Like, that's on Charji then, right? Because I didn't do that to myself. And as a master, the future master, like Babaji and Charji wouldn't have told you, they would have just fixed it, right? They would have adjusted and said, all right, we're going to fix this. He wasn't just going to say, hey, it's like going to a doctor and saying, hey, you have cancer. See ya. Like, Well, what should I do? I don't know. I'm just letting you know so you can figure it out, you know? Like that's the equivalent of that. I mean, it's even worse than that because, what am I going to do with that information? So I was stunned by his incompetence, and it was a really bad interaction. Like, I'm like, this is the guy? Like, this guy's a dope. Like what's he doing? Like, this is ridiculous. And so I got up to leave, and, I was the beginning of where I was going through the beginning of a divorce process, and my kid had just had dengue fever, and I had been sick for like a month and a half where I was so weak I could barely make it to the meditation hall. And so all these things were happening at once, right? There was like, chaos, and my marriage had become such, I mean, it always was bad, and now it was horrible. And it was, we were going to get divorced. It was, we were on the pathway to divorce, but it was even more contentious. So I was already overwhelmed. My daughter was, cutting herself, and, eventually she would commit suicide years later. So that was all the stuff that was going on with me, right? And I was completely overwhelmed, and I'm like, you're dropping this on me, right? Like, I'm just trying to bring you some freaking Tulsi seeds, bro. like you're going to say I'm crazy and hallucinating. It was just like embarrassingly bad. And I know it wasn't the case, right? Like whatever. I mean, those of you who know me, people who listen to my videos or whatever, but I'm a very rational and practical person. In fact, in the truth community, I'm known as one of the more, reasonable and less exaggerated. I'm just, and all the things I've endured and things, being able to be grounded in some sense, right? So anyways, I'm going to leave, and he says, oh, you can come back anytime. Just come in anytime you want to his office, which is something anybody would want. But I'm like, I can't come back here because, I'm hanging on by a thread, and like now you're just telling me that the next master's a dope, right? And I'm like, was like, oh my God, this is horrible. Like, this is a bad experience. I can't take it any more of this. Like, I couldn't come back and have another experience with this, right? I mean, it's just like just a bad thing he's done. You don't mess around with the yatra system. And I knew he was just making this up without really reading me because I had heard stories before. My brother had told me some of them from people who were around him that he did things like this, right? He just exaggerated, made things up, he lied, whatever. The story I heard was from a couple of senior people who were always like bummed that Kamlesh was always talking about when he got a sitting, oh, don't touch this point, don't touch this point. I'm in this point here. And like they always felt like he was pretentious about it. And so they came back from seeing Chargy, and they said, oh my God, can you give us a sitting? We're so gross. Can you clean us? And he gave the guys a sitting, and they asked afterwards, how were we gross? What did you see? And he goes, oh, you guys were so gross. Yeah, you need a big cleaning. And they go, we just saw Chargy. We're not gross at all. And he goes, okay, I didn't really read you. I just said that. So he admitted to lying about that to them. I mean, at least in this story I heard, right, from my brother, but I'd heard other things. So, and I'd seen times where he was poor at communicating, and, and these things, I saw more and more of those things, right? But so then, Master Chargy passed away, and my ex, we went to Sri Lanka, and she went off her thyroid medication, and she had physical, mental breakdown stuff, and my daughter was threatening suicide, and, all that stuff was, we had a situation where our visas expired, and we were in a crisis and had to deal with the Indian immigration and the police, and it was an absolute mess. And we went to Sri Lanka, and she took off for America, leaving me alone with one daughter who was sick constantly, one son who was so far behind in homeschooling. And, and I wasn't a part of the homeschooling for, like I wasn't suited for it. But my ex wasn't being open with me, and she wasn't even being realistic. And some of the things were going well in homeschooling. I can't say it's a total failure. But I had a 14-year-old son when she left who I found out didn't know the alphabet and couldn't write his name. And he was dreadfully behind in some of these things, and so, and Anna was dreadfully behind in math, and the other kids were, doing well, but, there was issues there. And she left me with this big mess and said that she was going to go off her thyroid medication and try to reboot her thyroid, and it might take as much as 2 years or longer, and she had to be alone, and I had to deal with the family and all these things while she did this. And then she decided to talk to people in the area and exacerbate the situation and undermine my credibility and talk shit about me to everybody that she could, and to to triangulate with my daughter Anna, so that Anna was spying and telling her everything and all these things, and Anna was like a whole thing, which was a horrible situation to put Anna in. It was really selfish, why she was hallucinating and like going through this crisis because she went off her thyroid medication, and she entered into areas of being paralyzed and other things. Inevitably, she hooked up with another guy and didn't tell me about it. So that's that was what's going on for me in that situation there, right? So I was dealing with all that chaos, and we went to Chargie's birthday celebration, but we stayed in our flat and we didn't stay at the gathering because it just wasn't an option. And so we commuted back and forth. But then there was going to be Daaji's historic gathering. And my kids, Daaji had changed, the Kamas had changed the age from 18 to 15. And my 3 older kids, I had 4 kids. And my 3 older ones had taken their sittings. And so this was going to be his first birthday gathering. And we were going to Tirupur, which was a famous place where they had all these gatherings. And I'd never been to and stayed at a gathering. We had just, we had been in India, and we never really were able to go to the gatherings until Chargie's birthday. We had been in and out of India since 2012, but we had never been to a birthday in Bambara. And the one we had been to, it rained so much, and, it was great, Chargie's first birthday gathering, but it was, the place flooded. I mean, it was a weird gathering. And so we heard that Daaji made this rule, but it wasn't clear that kids couldn't come. But I had a 13-year-old boy who was completely capable of sitting through satsang and not being a problem. And I talked to people, and they said, no, don't listen to him. He doesn't mean this, whatever. Like, people weren't clear about it. I talked to preceptors and senior people, and I couldn't find Daaji anywhere to ask him. And I was in a situation where my kids and my family and everything, we were just going through it, right? We had these visa crises, and, it was a tough time. And I was overwhelmed. I mean, there's a young woman who was a young Indian girl that lived in America like her whole life, and she was a doctor. And she was friends with my kids and, family. She came up to me today. She just like, you're all right? And I'm like, what? She goes, like, you're just, crouched over. Like, you're gray and you look like you're barely making it. It looks like you're going to collapse, right? And I'm like, oh, that's not good. Like, so that's what I looked like. Like, I was, bent over, and, I mean, there was days I just felt like, I couldn't make it another step. Like, it was just so tired, and, and we were getting sick a lot. And, my one daughter was sick. My other daughter was cutting herself and beating up kids at the ashram. And, she was having her emotional issues. And my other son was behind in homeschooling and, getting into it. Him and Anna were always fighting, and, Anna was bullying him. It was just, and I didn't want to push Anna over the edge. I mean, she was suicidal, and we were in a foreign country, and she was unstable. And then there was the divorce thing and all these things, right? And, just financial issues, and just when do we leave and go back to America, and how's that going to go? And, I was relying on I was getting maybe 3 sittings a week, and I was just going through this cleaning, right? Which I'll come back to because, before that, I mean, it lasted for about a year, and really for 3 months, really intensely. So my kids were really psyched about going to this gathering, and I couldn't send them by themselves. It was maybe our last opportunity. I didn't know if we'd ever get back to India. I didn't know if my kids were ever going to practice Sahaj Marg later in life. It was just so much unknown, and we were going to leave India pretty soon. We had been there a while, and, it's time to return back to America. It ended up being the following May. This is in 2015. Daaji's first, birthday celebration after Charji had passed away and all these things. He was now master and president of the system, and we would leave after Babaji's birthday gathering. And I just felt like I family needed to go to this gathering. And I understood Daaji's reasoning because at Charji's birthday gathering, I heard twice on the loudspeaker that a toddler was wandering around this big, this is in Tiruvallur, this 100-acre ashram by themselves with, 10, 15, 20,000 people there. Parents would just abandon their kids in the play area and then go to satsang, which is an effed up thing, right? But I never did that. Like, X and I took turns at satsang. Our kids were always attended to. There's people, we had this meditation center we used to go to in Sunderland, and there were people would come for there was these regional gatherings where about 80 people would come, and, a lot of parents would bring their kids, and one of the parents would stay with their kids, and other parents would just leave their kids in this, this basement area. And the kids would be running around like Lord of the Flies. Like they would just act out the whole time because they didn't have parents. Sometimes the parents would leave, 1-2-year-old kids there, right? Which is, this is Indian families, right? Basically. And, I never had done that. So, my kids were, for the most part, obviously they're having emotional issues and they're going through stuff, but they were mature now and they were teenagers and they were abhyasis, so they weren't a problem. But Daaji had made this arbitrary rule not to allow kids to go to his gathering, which he later realized was wrong because he immediately abandoned it because it was a failure on every level. And I'll get into that. And so I went to this German preceptor, a woman who's a doctor. Her and her husband are doctors, nice people. And she had kids around my kids' age. And I said to her, what are you going to do with your kids? She said, well, we're bringing them because, she said, when Daaji was talking to them one time, she was with, I think, other European people. She said that he never went to gatherings and he would stay behind and watch his 2 kids, and his wife would go to the gatherings. And she said all the people in the room after Daaji left said, that's not true. Like they saw him at every gathering, and they hadn't seen his wife once, right? Which was another idea of him just being deceptive. And she was telling me this like in a way that, our new master is somebody that you can't take at face value, which is a big problem, right? Which is, turned out to be true in so many ways. And I think he believes his own lies, which is even worse. So I, made the decision to bring my son. And we got to the gathering, and we were in Tirvalur, and we were there a little bit early. We rented a car. The guy drove us out there. Some guy, some Abhyasi arranged it for me. There's a kid who helped us get through the visa crisis. Wonderful human being, just a saintly person. 25-year-old kid lived at the ashram, and he helped us a lot. And he helped arrange a driver. And we got there, and there was like these neat bushes behind. They had a place with cots in it for people to sleep. Now, Tirupur was famous. I think it was a 5-hour drive or 7-hour drive from Chennai, but it wasn't that far. And there had been an ashram nearby, and it was a nice center, and they had experience with big gatherings. They had this big piece of land over 100 acres, and it's where all these big epic gatherings had taken place over the years. Charji's 80th birthday or whatever it was that got 80,000 people, or 75th birthday or whatever it was, like these big gatherings. And I hadn't been able to attend any one of them, so this was our big thing and my big opportunity. And we found a dorm, and they had these nice cots. It was already set up. It was more comfortable than, and my family and I settled in. My kids were psyched. And there was these bushes, and there was just hundreds of butterflies on them, and I was just feeling great, right? I bought my kids all copies of Reality at Dawn. They were going to start reading them at the gathering. There was this, it was going to be a thing, right? And we just needed it. I just felt a sense of relief. When you're undergoing a crisis in your life and you're going through a cleaning, these gatherings are tremendously beneficial. They're beneficial all the time, but, they help you, get just recharged and all these things. I was just wiped out. I just was, I was, and, I felt so much better when my ex left. That's how bad the marriage was. That, even after she left and all the repercussions were, I realized that 60% of my energy was just going to propping her up and all these things. My kids were interacting with kids in the ashram area, so they had a social life, and, there were things that were better, but I was, I'd been worn out and going through this beginning of this cleaning. And so we went to satsang, and we came back, and my son said someone came up to him and asked him how old he was, and said, your dad needs to come talk to me. And so I go, F word, because I knew there was going to be an issue, right? And like I said, I had asked people, and And people were unclear because Daaji was such a crappy communicator. He made this announcement, but it wasn't clear. And he literally knew nothing about the way people, whatever it was. The level of, like, you just couldn't make an arbitrary rule like this and not explain it and not, it was just, he sucks. Like, it was my first introduction of him just sucking and failing as a master. And so I looked for the guy who wanted to talk to me, but I couldn't find him. It was like 7, 8 o'clock at night. And I couldn't find the guy. And so my kids were, doing whatever they were doing and, hanging out with their friends. And the person said, come back to registration a bit. The guy would be back. And, he was a son of somebody, a prominent, famous person in the mission. A guy who wrote a book on, Chargy. And, somebody who I, knew his name and I knew a little bit of him. And so at 10 o'clock at night, I saw a family getting kicked out of the ashram. A girl was like 10 years old, and the family was sleeping. They woke him up and kicked him out of the ashram. I'm like, this is heartfulness? Are you guys calling this heartfulness? You're out of your fucking minds, right? This is ridiculous. Like, you can't be doing stuff like this. This is like, I'm like, well, this is when I should have known then, or this is when I knew Daaji sucked. Like, I didn't know I knew, but I knew. So I went to talk to the guy, and he said, you got to leave. And I'm like, what is this? Like, and I explained the situation. I got a 13-year-old kid, we're going back to America, like, and he's just like, no, there's no wiggle room. And I'm like, well, this is effed up. Like, and then I tell my kids, and Anna, who was, very oppositional, defiant, said, well, we're staying. I want to stay. And I'm like, she's an at-risk kid. She cuts herself, and she's just, she's not stable. And my other daughter couldn't eat Indian food. She had physical issues. I didn't feel comfortable leaving them at the gathering. They were 18, 17. They were 17, 16, and 15, right? And so they were teenagers. But, I wasn't going to leave them in some foreign country for 3 days at a gathering with, they didn't have we didn't really have ways of contacting each other. There's like, whatever. And so, like, I go back to talk to the guy, and like, and Anna comes with me, and she's like, you're not going to wreck this for me. And she's like completely, harassing me while I'm talking to the guy. And we're swearing at each other, and I'm like swearing at the guy. I'm like losing it. Like, I can't believe how bad this sucks. And I'm like, it's the middle of the night. He goes, well, you can leave first thing in the morning, but just you have to be out of here before the first set's on. And so I talk to my kids, and Anna goes and talks to two other older kids and turns them against me. They all want to stay because they have friends there. And I'm like, all right, whatever. You guys are on your own. Like, you're going to do this, your adult thing. Like, this is your Abiasis now, and I'm not going to be here, right? I'm quitting. Like, I'm done. Like, my thought was, after so many years, if I can't get and make it through a gathering, one of these epic gatherings, how is this my thing, right? Why is this happening? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. Like, even after all the proof and all the ways I needed Sahaj Marg, of course, like, deep down I knew I could never quit. But I'm like, I'm done. Because my son and I left earlier that morning. The sun was coming up, and it was a beautiful sunrise. And the sitting was just starting as we were driving out of the ashram, and I could feel the transmission, and it was an amazing sitting. And I'm like, oh my God, like driving away from the transmission, it was like heartbreaking. I can't tell you how painful it was. Just on a spiritual level. And I'm like, getting thrown out of a gathering and just like, yeah, he made this rule, but it was the wrong rule. By the next gathering, he had already gotten rid of the rule because he and it failed. So they said we could stay at the ashram, which was about 10 minutes away. They had an ashram there. And they said there are a lot of families staying over there with kids, and they're commuting back and forth. So we went to the ashram, and it's everything that I, have known about the irresponsibility of parents, because there was over 100 kids and 3 adults at the ashram. The kids are running around, parented. Like, there's a time where there's a gathering at the Sunderland ashram where all the parents had abandoned their kids. And I came home to get something, and I turned the TV on for a sec for some reason. And the that famous story about these kids who end up on an island, Lord of the Flies was on. I'd read Lord of the Flies, and the kids, go full savage. If you read the book, and that movie was on. I'm like, that reminded me of what's going on in this meditation hall, in Sunderland, because I went back and there was these kids that were by themselves, and the parents had basically would abandon these kids, and they were small kids at satsang. And what would that tell the kids? That's why a lot of some of them don't start, right? Because the parents aren't there for them. And so these kids are running around. There's no place to sleep. And I look at my son like, what do you want? You want to stay here? I mean, with these kids, or you want to go to a hotel? He's like, let's go to a hotel. And so I'm like, I'm done. Like, this is a joke, because everything that Daaji was trying to accomplish, was trying to avoid, was happening here at this ashram. Unsupervised kids, irresponsible parents. And, and it was just, I'm not going to be the only adult with, one of the only adults with these kids running around crazy. Like, it's totally unfair. And I've been through that before, right? Where these kids were left unsupervised. And, my ex and I used to do activities with kids, with our kids and other kids and parents. And the kids who are like unsupervised, never wanted to do them, right? So we had these Sahaj Marg activities and things, like we would create a workbook and, stuff like this. I wanted to pass all this stuff on to Daaji. But like when I went to present these things, I started telling him about etheric gardening, and he told me I was in 0.5 and I was hallucinating because, he sucks. I mean, he sucks as a person. He sucks as a master. And so he made these arbitrary rules, that he was a horrible communicator. And I went to the hotel, and I was just like, there's a moment of freedom where I realized I can do whatever I want. Like, I no longer am bound by the rules and the character quality. Like, I can go just be a regular person, and I no longer have to worry about, being a spiritual person. Like, I can just go do whatever I want. Like it was like freedom, like for like 3 days. But like I would start doing the 9 p.m. prayer. Like I couldn't stop doing I'd wake up and I'd meditate. Like I couldn't stop, right? And so, but by rights, like I should have quit, because like, the whole thing was goofy. So I got back home and I wrote Daaji a letter, Kamlesh. And I said, look, this is what happened to me, and I understand why you made the rule. I understand I talked about the things that had happened. But I said, this rule didn't work. Like, it was poorly communicated. Kids were always the future of the mission. Of course, now you see Daaji sitting at the gatherings with his granddaughter on his lap, right? Like, now all of a sudden he loves kids, and kids, he wrote that wisdom bridge, and he started rolling out his grandkids. It's very performative. But back when, my family was in total crisis and we needed the gathering, we drove home, and my daughter Anna said she was staring at me, and she just was filled with hatred. We went to like a Subway, and she was filled with hatred. Like, she just hated me on like a visceral level. And then she said it just cleaned off. I was like, well, at least she got something out of the gathering. But, the kids, they didn't have a great gathering, and, it would have been better if I was there, my daughter had issues with her health and, whatever. Anna didn't go to all the group meditations. She stopped going to the satsangs, and she was done with her abhyas, and so, it was an effed up thing. But I went back home, and we got to our flat, and I just realized I had to do my practice. So I wrote this letter to Daaji, and I said, it didn't work, the rule. All these kids were running around unsupervised in the ashram, which is just as dangerous and just even more so. And the parents still abandoned them. And, it's not, people are going to come to the gatherings anyway, and it's not a functional rule, just whatever. So Daaji didn't reply to me. But when we went to the gathering in April, there was a teenager seminar that my 3 older kids went to, and then we had the gathering for Babaji's birthday. Right before we came back to America, and the gathering went off pretty well. We were in Kata. It was the first kind of big gathering there. We didn't go to Basant, but I think it was the first Bandara, and it was it was kind of special. And the kids. It was nice to go to a gathering before we came back home. And they were allowing kids now, and there was something said about me because they made a little extra effort Like they realized that I got fucked by the Daaji rule. And so there's a little bit of some, maybe, I thought like some effort to, make sure that we felt welcome or whatever. At least I thought that was there. But then we returned to America, and we returned in May, and Daaji was coming to Los Angeles. He had 3 gatherings, one in Detroit, one in Los Angeles, and one in New York. And he was coming to Los Angeles, when we returned to America, I limped back to America, I had like $5,000. I mean, I had the YouTube channel, but we didn't have a car. We didn't have a place to live. I didn't have a support system. My ex had, badmouthed me in the mission. And so, I knew I was coming back to a situation where we were going to have to start from scratch. And, I hadn't been doing the homeschooling, but we had to get that. I had kids who were desperately behind, Anna and my younger son. And, I had to get all these things. I had to just deal with life's problems that were being put on hold. And so there was a woman who reached out to me, and, we had sort of an online relationship, and she helped us to come back to America. Like I sent her money, and she put a deposit down for an apartment, and she helped a lot. Like she was like, we wouldn't have been able to make the transition back without her help. And, I kind of saw right off the bat that she had her own kind, she was a little bit crazy, and I just couldn't go through that again. Her son he had a lot of issues, and, I knew it wasn't going to work out because I just wasn't going to get, into a situation like I was before with somebody, with victim consciousness, and somebody who was like emotionally unstable. Like I just, I'd rather be single than have to go through that again. And she also had potential to be an Abiyasi though. So, I invited her along to go with us to see Daaji and this gathering in LA. And I had heard some things like, I could tell that there was some negativity towards me. Information came back to me that, Daaji had basically talked about me and other people negatively. And, part of it stemmed from this letter I wrote to him, and part of it stemmed from him having a relationship with my ex and taking her side in the divorce, not knowing, what I had been through. Because he couldn't read people. He doesn't have the ability to read people. And he had a relationship with her new husband who quit under Charji and came back. Like he didn't like Charji. He had been a Babaji person. But he came back, and like Daaji apparently loved him, right? So I realized there'd be some negativity towards me, but I didn't care. Like I knew that I needed a boost because I had been relying on the satsangs and I went through, and plus, I should say this. So, sometime in we went through the flood. So my son broke his arm. My daughter Anna got sick for 14 days. She had a fever, a low-grade fever for 14 days. We couldn't figure out what it was. We went through the flood. So this is after, these are the things that happened afterwards. So, my mom had died that year before. My son had dengue. We got, we had a visa crisis because we overstayed our passports, and then we went to get new visas, and our passports were expiring. They shouldn't have ever let us into Sri Lanka. So we had to go to the consulate, get emergency passports, and then get emergency visas. My ex left the family and went back to America and went off her medication and started to, like there was a time where we Skyped and her face had changed. Like I wouldn't have recognized her if I was walking by her in public. Like her thyroid, it was just like the weirdest thing. And she was undermining, the kids were, acting up. And I was, getting the YouTube channel going. And, I was covering very intense things for me. I was covering politics and Hollywood and things that were, the dark side of these things in terms of the truther videos I was making. And it was hard on me, it was making an adjustment to doing this work. And it was, I needed a lot of like sittings. I was getting sometimes 3 individual sittings a week, and I was going to satsang sometimes 3 times a day. Every day I went to satsang, and then I'd go to the meditation hall for 9 p.m. prayer. And just, even with all that, after the gathering with Kamlesh's birthday, I was really struggling. And my daughter Anna was acting out. She wasn't getting along with the other kids. She was undermining. Everything was going on. And then I got really sick. Like I just got, again, like really weak and just, I couldn't, it was maybe about 3, 4 days, and my stomach and just all this stuff. And then we went through the flood right after that, when our apartment flooded, foot in 3 feet of water. And then we had to get our visas renewed a week after the flood, and we just got out of the country in time because our flights got canceled and we had to rearrange our trip. We had money issues and things like that. So we went back to Sri Lanka, which was always stressful because of, all the things that had gone down there before. And then we came back with our visas renewed. And my daughter Anna got sick for 14 days, and like we couldn't figure out what it was. Took her to the doctor, got all these tests. And then she finally got better, and I was making a video after Satsang on Sunday, and I just felt blissed out. And my son's friend, who was a French kid, comes to the door and says, "Have you seen your son? You're my son." I was like, no, he's not here. He goes, "No, he's at the ashram. His arm is broken." So we had to go to the hospital, and they had to put a pin in his arm, and his bone shattered. And he was at the ashram when he was sitting on the monkey bars, and they were like, the playground there was like, they had like a rotten slide that had a giant rust hole in it with jagged metal sticking up. Like it was like a playground from hell. And my son was on these monkey bars that were like 14 foot off the ground, and he fell, and he landed on his arm, and his arm shattered. And so, there's just all this stuff, right? And, I recognized that I had a bitterness, resentment against God from a past life. And I figured out a past life, it was someone from, I kind of realized I was someone in the Mahabharata, and that person had a real bad life with they were an Asura king, and that lived for a very, very long time. And so I was like, oh, that life screwed me over, right? So, if I was this person, who I'm pretty sure I was, then, historically I could trace back these lives and realize that, I had some scars. So I just accepted like all the things that were happening as being a blessing, the whole thing. And I worked the system. I got all these sittings and things. And at some point the resentment just got cleaned away. And I felt like a new person. Like I felt like I was making more serotonin. Like I was just happy. I was just like, I've been carrying this burden around me my whole life, multiple lives. And I was so grateful to the system, and the masters. And I just like, my God, if I just got this one thing in my whole life, this would be it. This would be enough. This was a wonderful gift. So, it just, even after all I'd been through with Daaji and the whole thing and doubts about him and whatever, I was like transformed. And so I was, I completely bought in. And, I was, during this process when we were getting ready to leave, and, it was obvious that divorce was going to happen. I found out, there was a guy who's, I call him Mr. S. He's a nightmare. He's a guy in charge of the YouTube videos. He's one of Daaji's people. Someone had told me that Daaji had tried to get rid of him a few times, but that the guy, was playing a dark game. He was playing a dirty game, which implied almost blackmail. And Daaji couldn't get rid of the guy. Like he reprimanded him, and this guy's a nightmare. But this guy came up to me before I knew all that, and said, and my family and I are looking for a way to get back to America. And, I hadn't had this relationship with this woman yet. We hadn't had contact, so like I didn't know how we were going to come back to America. I had nowhere to go. I had no family, no support system, like nothing. And all our stuff's in storage, what we had. And, I didn't want to go back and live near my ex because I just realized all this stuff about her. And like, I just, I just didn't feel good about the kids having, contact with her. And I didn't want to live close by. The whole thing. And, I'm concluding all these details because they're important. And so Mr. S said, we need a caretaker for the ashram in Georgia. And that just made sense to me because we could go there and live there, and I could get settled, and then we could figure out where we wanted to live in America. I could get a car. My license had been stolen because somebody broke into our bedroom the day before my ex left. And my ex was having a panic attack crisis because she was off her medication and she couldn't breathe. We had the door open because she needed fresh air. and we both fell asleep. Like she couldn't go to sleep, so I didn't fall asleep till like 3 or 4 in the morning. And I woke up and heard something next to the bed. And there had been monkeys outside our window, and I thought it was a monk. First, I thought it was a rat. There was a monkey. Then I woke up, and I knew it was a guy going through the end table, and I couldn't see him, but I knew it was a person. And I yelled, "Get the F out of here, MNFer." And I jumped up and chased the guy out, but he had my wallet, and so I needed to get a new driver's license. So I was coming back to America without a driver's license. And, it was a whole thing, right? So there were these things. There was just a lot of crises. And the cops came in, and they were, like, suspicious of us. I mean, we went through a whole thing in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is not India. It's worse. And, this guy says, you want to live at the ashram? I said, sure, we'll do it. So I was just about to buy the tickets, non-refundable tickets to Atlanta. And I hesitated. And I walked to the ashram, and I walked by Mr. S, and he says, oh, yeah, I say, well, we're ready to go to Molina. He goes, oh, no, yeah, you can't do that. And I knew that he had talked to Daaji, and Daaji said no. He didn't want me to be the caretaker. Like, I could tell that happened. But the guy didn't tell me immediately because he's a piece of crap, either one of them. And I almost bought non-refundable tickets, so I was like, these guys suck. And I knew my reputation had been smeared, so I was like, all right, whatever. And I looked at this guy. I'm like, I don't want to, I don't like this guy. I don't want to be, whatever. The same day, right before that, my kids and I would go see these movies every Tuesday at the mall. It was like we bonded. There were a lot of Marvel movies going on there, American movies, and we'd go have dinner at the mall. And we watched this really funny Disney movie, and Disney movies suck, and Disney's evil, but this one was about this fox and this rabbit, and it was a very kind of uplifting movie, fun. The family enjoyed it. And we went to this Italian restaurant. It was like kind of being back in America, and we'd go there occasionally, and we're eating dinner, and my daughter Anna said, Mom's hospitalized. I'm not paralyzed. And I'm like, what? And I got this pit in my stomach, like I'd been punched in the stomach. And we hadn't talked or weren't interacting, and I knew we were going to get divorced, but, her dying affected me. Like, I was like, I was worried she was going to die because she went off her thyroid medication. And even Kamlesh said that was wrong. They shouldn't do that. But she did anyway, and she showed signs of, like, physical issues. And it was like I was punched in the stomach, and I got up, I paid for the bill. My kids were still there, and I started walking around the mall, and I was just like walking around freaked out that, she was going to die. And my kids, kids often blame themselves, and she had always been such a victim. And, I had bought into that and often, basically went along with her. She was always talking about how the kids were sucking her energy or, she always blamed everybody for her stuff. And so I knew the kids would all partially blame themselves, which was bad. And, she was really sick. So I freaked out, and I wrote her a nice note, because of what, whatever it was, just to check in to see, how she was. And she didn't know what to do because she was with another guy at that point. And Anna, she had been paralyzed, but, she oftentimes, my ex, would make things up to get attention or whatever. But I do believe at some point she got paralyzed, and there seemed to be there was the time when it happened was maybe months ago or whatever. But she didn't answer me. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, she dead? Whatever it was. And she was really, last time I talked to her, she was a jerk at the flood to me because we didn't contact her. And I knew she was going to be upset. And I told the kids, if you find somebody with a cell phone that works or whatever, tell that person to contact your mom because she'll be freaking out. And, so finally we got access to a cell phone, and I called her. And she was just really harsh and hard and mean, and I had just gotten the kids through this crisis, right? And the kids had performed great because they had been trained, mostly by me to, for survival stuff and whatever. They had really excelled. And we were getting out of the flood area finally. And she was really, bitchy. And she was talking about a camera she got, or I guess Anna was telling me about this. Some guy was lending her an expensive camera. And I sensed that maybe this guy was more than, just a friend. But I didn't have time to deal with that because we had to go to this, the visa stuff. But she was, just really bitchy and unhelpful from there on end whenever we had any kind of conversation. And so, I when she didn't contact me, I checked out her Facebook page, and there was a message from her daughter's boyfriend saying that, that he was dropping a video off that her and this guy could watch, some guy, and that's how I found out she was with another guy, like on Facebook, right? Which is effed up, and it was a blessing in ways I can't even tell you, and a relief, but it was still really effed up, right? And so the day that this guy, Mr. S, told me that we weren't going back to Molina was the day I found out about my ex and her, new man. And then she wrote me a long letter, and she didn't cop to anything. She didn't admit she was with another guy, and she blamed me for a bunch of stuff. It was just typical her. But I was already done. Then I was relieved. I knew we were going to get a divorce, but it was just the whole thing was effed up. And partly because I was so worried about her when I heard she was paralyzed, and I worried she was going to die, and then I found out she had, was with another guy, and it would have been a big relief if she had just told me. And the divorce and everything would have went much better, and everything would have been better if she had just told me. But she told the kids that she's worried that I was going to take the kids and stay in India, and that was impossible. Like, not only was it something I wouldn't do, it was impossible to do. Like, it takes 13 years to be an American citizen, and she had abandoned the family, and she'd go months without talking to the kids. She quit on their homeschooling. She quit on everything. And, I knew eventually they were going to have some sort of relationship with her. And that was like, just stupid. Like, she just made things up and, so that she could lie and manipulate and all these things. But anyway, so we came back to America. We went to the gathering, which went pretty well at Babaji's birthday. And we came back to America, and we were going to attend this gathering. And this woman, I asked her if she wanted to go because I knew that, our relationship wasn't going to probably work out, but she showed potential of being a possible good Abhyasi. So I wanted her to have that opportunity. If our relationship didn't work out, at least she would get an opportunity. I talked about the meditation. She was open to it. So she agreed to come. And we drove down there. I'd bought a new, an old van, a Toyota van, and it really wasn't running that great. We drove 4 hours to the desert. It was hot, in June. And, we got to the gathering, and there was this woman. She was like red hair, kind of, I don't know who she was, never heard of her before, but she was like the person that you would go and she was a very California type person. And she said, "Oh, you're Paul Romano," like she had heard of me, which wasn't good. And so I was like, "Oh, this isn't good," and then, but I said to her, "Look, there's this woman's a new Abhyasi. Plus the woman, when we were driving here to the gathering, she started to weep. She's out of the blue, and she just felt all this wave of emotion." I said, "Well, that happens to people before gatherings. Things like this happen where you'll feel some emotion, and you'll have a wave of emotion, and it starts like a cleaning process." And she was like, "Well, how do they know I'm coming, right? Like, how do they know? Because there's just this," which was a really kind of good question because it just works on an etheric level, and there's these divine beings that are working on behalf of the mission, right? So we're driving to the gathering. She had this experience. So I go there and I talk to this woman who's like the person that everybody had to register with when we came to. And I said, "This woman needs a sitting. Could you find a preceptor for her?" She goes, "Well, I'm a preceptor. I'll give her a sitting." So I was like, "Great." And so this woman comes back, this woman I'm seeing. And 15 minutes later, I'm like, "Well, that was a short sitting." She goes, "She didn't give me a sitting. She grilled me about you. She said, how do you know, Paul? You guys dating?" And she was just working this woman for information, right? And I'm like, well, this is someone I never met and never heard of. And she knows who I am, and this is not good. Like, so it's when I had like sort of an indication of how bad it was going to be. And then all these people who were, Chargie's inner circle, people I knew, one guy stayed at his house. They came in and they didn't even say hi to me. Like, they were walking by. They were all treating me like I was a leper. And, this was very pervasive throughout the gathering. And so I'm like, Kamlesh must have said something. Because it'd be one thing, all these people are believing like I'm some sort of a villain. And, it must come from my ex, but also that letter I wrote Kamlesh. And I knew from, I've heard stories from some of his inner circle, and I'd seen him pout and, over like an extra book so they handed him a bunch of books at the gathering. And one of the books was not supposed to be released. And he glared at the woman who handed him the books, even though she had nothing to do with it. She was just the announcer. And she put her hands up like, I don't know, but he was just, and he stomped off the stage and pouted. And I'd heard that he was, kind of a little baby about these things. He has these little tantrums. And so, and I figured that when I wrote him that letter that, he, turned on me because, I criticized his decision making. Of course, he was wrong and he reversed his decision. And maybe my letter played a part in that. I don't know. But it was his mistake that cost me. But, he was, acting like a little victim, like a little bitch. And so we were going to go to the first satsang, or we went to the first satsang was in the afternoon, in the evening. And this woman said that she turned around when Kamish came in, and she had been a Reiki person. She had done Reiki, and she had a big Reiki circle, so she had worked with energy. And she said his energy is amazing, right? This is back when Kamlesh had energy. He's fresh after being made master. And he had this presence, and he walked into the room, and you could feel it. And she was like, oh, his energy is amazing. I'm like, yeah, So I'm like, well, we need to introduce it to him because new people are supposed to meet him. And so the next morning, the car broke down. And so we went to go get the car fixed. And there was this nice Indian couple from Oklahoma, and one of the people who watched my YouTube videos had meditated with them. And so they wanted to take pictures with me, and they were really sweet with my family, and they took my kids over to meditate. So this was the one kind of contrast. Everyone else is treating me like I'm a leper, and these people are treating me like I'm some kind of celebrity. It was like this, this contrast, right? So this woman and I drop off the car to be fixed, but we're not going to make it to satsang. So we get to satsang. We had to walk. We went to this local dealer, and it was like whatever. The car. We needed the car to drive us back home. So this was our option. And we got to satsang, was just ending, and there was these chairs right outside the side entrance, and Daaji was running in and out of the side entrance. Like he came in the back when he first came in, but he was, we sat at the side entrance right by the stage. And I said, if he comes out this way, because I didn't know he was going to come out this way, but he did. I said, I'll introduce you to him. So it was just me and her and him and somebody walking behind him. So it was 4 people. And Daaji sees us and walks right by me and doesn't acknowledge me. We'd known each other for years. He doesn't say hello. He doesn't, I'm trying to introduce a new person. And I'm like, this is such a bitch move, right? Like, I had these conversations where I felt he was stupid. Like there were times where I'm like, this guy, right? I mean, like but he had the energy and I saw the work that was done. And, the other thing was this, well, let me finish this story. So he just walks by like I don't exist. And she goes, why'd he do that, this woman? I'm like, well, he shouldn't have. That's just rude and fucking, it's a bitch move, right? And I'm like, but I knew that they were all talking to me like I was a leper and, they were making me feel unwelcome here, which I was like, I'm not quitting just because they suck. Like they didn't know anything that had gone on. And, the story that I told you, my side of the story and what I endured in the marriage or any of these things, right? I had reasonable explanations. Like I'm a reasonable person. I'm not nice. I'm not, I can be mean. I can be harsh. I got my issues. But, I hadn't done anything to them and anything to the mission personally, right? And I got kicked out of a gathering and I wrote him a letter and, my ex badmouthed me to him and this is what his reaction was. I'm like, this guy's not, I should have known I knew in that moment, this guy's not a master. I'd hoped he had grown into it. But there was one more thing I should add here. So back when I went through this cleaning and my family was transitioning back to America, I had these thoughts. I remember this talk I was sitting at, Don Savrin, this guy from Canada, and he had taken care of Babaji when Babaji was really sick. Him and his wife were medical people. Like he was a nurse and she was, I think maybe a nurse as well. And they helped nurse Babaji back to health. And Babaji said, I want to give you a boon. And Don Savrin said to me, said in the talk that whenever someone got a boon, it was always their downfall. They'd always wish for something for themselves, and if they did that, it would always betray them, and it always caused them problems. And so he didn't want to fall for that trap. And so he decided to, he said, well, I want you to get better physically. And Babaji said, I want to give you a boon, a blessing. I want to, something for yourself, some spiritual gift, whatever you want. He goes, no, I'm a healer, and I've been working with you, and you're my patient, and that would be a gift. And he said, within a month or so, Babaji put on like 15 pounds. He had an ulcer, started eating again. He got better, even better, And he said he took this picture of Babaji. It was a picture on Reality at Dawn. And while I was giving this talk, that picture was right behind him. It's a picture where Babaji is sitting with his hands on his knees, and it's a famous picture on the cover of Reality at Dawn, the first edition of it. Like everyone had seen this picture. It was a great talk. And so I thought about that, and I was like, it just came to my mind one day. And I said, if I was ever offered a boon, this was right after I got the cleaning and, this transformative cleaning. And I said, I would say that I would want to be a part of the Sahaj Marg system and work for the system like forever. I'd want to be a part of this thing, whatever it was. Like, as long as this existed, that I would be a part of it, like this movement, this spiritual movement, past this life and the future and all these things. And like 3 or 4 nights later, I had a dream where Charji came to me and offered me a boon. And I said what I had said, in the dream, I said the thing I said, right? This idea of me staying with Sahaj Marg. And I woke up and I'm like, holy crap, right? And I felt great about it. Like, I'm like, no matter what happens to me, I'm not going to quit, right? Because it just, like that had been an issue already because of like these things that had happened. And so, there was a second time at the gathering where I said, well, let's give it another shot, see if I can introduce you to Daaji, right? Maybe he was in a bad mood, I don't know. And so I positioned myself. He was walking. There was more people out. But I was walking, and I positioned myself so he, had to walk right in front of us. And he purposely didn't look at me. And, like, he knew I was there and walked by me again. And this woman's like, what is he doing, right? And she was already freaked out because, this woman had grilled her. And, like, she felt the energy, but she was like, this thing's a joke, this organization. Of course she did. Because it was a joke, right? Daaji's he's not a master, he's a tool. She felt his energy, but like, what kind of person acts like that, right? It's a normal person, but someone, who's supposedly the master of the system. And again, there had been nothing between us that would make it reasonable for him to act this way, right? So my daughter Anna, who was very social and, she was having issues, like I said, with cutting herself, and she had left her boyfriend. I didn't know she was getting on the plane. When we flew out, there was more crisis. Like, we flew out of the country, and we flew out at 2 a.m, and I didn't get any sleep because I didn't know if Anna was going to come with us. I thought she was going to, run away, and like we would have to get on the plane because they were non-refundable tickets, and she'd be stuck in India by herself. Like that was a possibility. And so I was pretty stressed about it. And we got to the airport, and our bags were overweight, and we had to bring back my ex's stuff, which she bitched about because I had to leave some of the stuff at the airport. Because now there was one less person, and we had all of her stuff to bring back because most of her stuff was still in India in storage when we went to Sri Lanka. And on top of that, we got a flight on Virgin Airlines to Las Vegas, and we came and we were all allowed to bring 2 suitcases that each weighed 50 pounds. And now we could only have ones that weighed like 40 pounds. So we had to shed things. We were leaving things at the airport in Chennai because our bags were too heavy. Like, it was that kind of thing. And we got to England, and we had to stay there for a night at a hotel, and we were going to fly out of a different airport. But I was so worn out and so, just stressed to get to the airport, and I was so tired, I didn't realize that we had to fly out of a different airport, one day I'd never heard of. Like, we flew into Heathrow, which is the only one I thought was there in London, but we flew out of another airport, and we missed the flight, and that was a whole thing. But luckily, some angel of a person there took care of us. This woman was like sent by God, we didn't have to pay any more money, and we could leave the next day. She got us on a flight, I didn't have much money. It would have been, it would have broken us financially if I had to buy new tickets or whatever. So anyways, this was part of it. And this new woman who I was seeing, when I called her and said we missed the flight, she said, "Why did you do that to me?" And she pitched a fit, and that's when I knew that I was jumping out of the frying pan into the fire, right? So all these things were part of this thing, right? Like it was, So my daughter Anna wanted to go back to India, and I said, "You really can't because you have to leave every. You're not responsible. I mean, she's crazy. She was under functioning, and she was an at-risk kid." And, of course, no parent would want their kid just going to a country, but she had all these friends there. And when she was able to talk to them, which is usually in the middle of the night, she wasn't sleeping because it was a different time zone. She was okay, but she was flipping out and cutting herself a lot. And so I said, look, you're going to be 18. And she had just turned 18. So I can't stop you from going, but I can't pay for the tickets. And you should get Kamlesh's permission. And I said, wait till we go to this gathering and you can ask him or whatever. Or she must have been 17 and she'd be 18 the next year. So she just had her birthday. So I was like, I would want her just to, get permission because you can't go to India without support. And, it just was crazy for her to even think about. I mean, she could barely function. And she didn't have her high school diploma. I mean, how would she get a job? She wasn't going to get a job there. But she, if I took that away from her, she would have been cutting herself even more. And without a social life and her friends, she didn't get along with her sister. And she was trying to, act like she was being possessed by demons. One time she said she was going to kill her sister with this candlestick. I was the safety of the kids. And, I knew what would happen if I took her to CPS or, I brought her in for her to, like she said, she cut herself and I brought her into the emergency room. The Department of Social Service would get involved and maybe all the kids would be taken away. I mean, it was just, my family was at risk. And so we're at the gathering and she's going to talk to Kamlesh. But she never gets that opportunity. He doesn't make himself available and I don't know how it happened. And so we're about to leave. I said to the kids, look, you guys might not realize this, but this is this is a gift being a part of the Sahaj Marg system. They grew up in it. And this woman is getting this opportunity. Let's try to just not flip out and just please, let's get through this thing and whatever. But, of course, Anna was, she just, she was an at-risk person that would use suicide as a manipulative tool. And so her and her brother get into a fight. And he kind of threw an orange at her, not really hard or whatever, but he was in a bad mood. And we were all about to leave the gathering. And she just walks out in the streets of L.A. and we don't know where she is. She just leaves the ashram or this place that we're meeting with Kamlesh, right? And we, and I don't feel the sittings were that great. There's been the issue where I'm being ostracized and, I'm hoping to get a boost here, right? Like you would get at a normal gathering. And she just wanders around and she gets in the car and, we finally get her. And this woman tracks her down and we get her in the car. She's unstable. And I'm trying to not yell at her, but I'm really pissed and, upset. And, I said something to her and then we're driving and the woman turns around and Anna's arms are bleeding. She had brought a late razor blade with her and she cut herself, right? And now her arms are bleeding. And this is how we're leaving the gathering. We're driving back to our thing. We have to stop and get gauze for her. And it's just, I knew right then that Daaji sucked. Him blowing me off and talking behind my back and undermine my relationship with everyone in the mission. And all these people looking at me like I was a piece of crap and, whatever they had heard about me, whatever happened. But leaving a gathering like that, and then, having been kicked out of the other gathering and leaving worse off, feeling worse after the gathering, that had never happened. Leaving a gathering worse than you felt when you came in, it was completely foreign. And, I was in a situation where I needed people. And I'm not good at reaching out for help, and I'm not good at socializing, I'm not good at networking, and, I don't, I have not the nicest personality. I'm not whatever it is. And, but I needed people, and my family needed people. Eventually my daughter was going to kill herself, right? That was going to happen, right? That was, I'm trying not to get emotional here, but that was the inevitable outcome. And I knew it all along. Like I couldn't conceive of her having, being able to function. Whatever part that I contributed to that, whatever part was my fault, whatever, all of that. But, I needed support. My family needed support. And this was an organization called Heartfulness that I'd been a part of for 27 years at that time, right? Whatever it was, 20 some odd years. I started in 1993. It was 2016, so I guess 26 years, right? And I needed help. And regardless of what people thought about me and, whatever, my kids needed help. And I was their sole support system. My ex had abandoned them. She was crazy. She had all these emotional issues. And she, she was a horrible person. And, I was all they had. And I needed my support team. I needed support people, regardless of whatever they heard going on. And this was the situation. And leaving with my daughter's arms bleeding from this gathering and Daaji just blowing us off. What a piece of shit he is, right? And again, I'm not saying I'm a victim here. Like I said, I benefited from all this stuff. Things were cleaned out. I matured. But, that moment, I'm like, I don't need any of you guys. And it took me a while for this to maturate into me being able to, this story I told you earlier about receiving direct transmission from Lology. But this isn't, this guy could never be my master, right? Like what I saw him do, his failure, all of it. Later on, he would make a video about suicide that was so disrespectful. He was such a, it was such a punk ass video, such a weak ass video. And he blamed loved ones for people's suicide. And he was so wrong and he sucked so bad. He's so inarticulate, he's so stupid. And the video was so classless. And one of my viewers who had a similar situation with her daughter and some other people contacted me and said they had heard about Heartfulness and were doing it. And they wanted to quit after seeing that video on suicide. It was so, he just sucked so bad. And the guy making the YouTube videos, the guy in charge of the channel, all these Abiasis had, senior people had come up, people were working with, Daaji regularly. They were upset by how bad the videos were and how bad Daaji was at public speaking, because that's part of it, right? But this is when I needed people. This is when I needed my community, and this was my community. And they, ostracized me. And so I feel nothing for them. I got nothing for them. And this is part of what I'm talking about in making these videos. There are nice people, there are saintly people, there are people that were there for us when we went through the flood. There are people that were supportive of me as a preceptors when I began the mission. There are people who helped me out. And I felt some, gratitude to the mission, certainly Chargy and the divine hierarchy, the masters of the system. But when Daaji took over, everyone, people exhibited punky behaviors. Daaji had arbitrary rules. He's a little bitch, right? He's just not he's a little sulky, he walked by me a little sulky, just little pouty, little sulky, whatever. And the way he's treated Chargy and all these things, right? And so, I knew then, I wasn't going to quit because I said, why am I going to quit? Why should I quit? Because these people suck. And I had that dream about the boon, and I still believe that to be true because I'm doing Sahaj Marg. Daaji and these people have left and are doing Heartfulness. They've left Sahaj Marg behind. Daaji's changed the maxims. He's changed the 9 p.m. prayer. He's got rid of 2 of the holidays. He's bringing in all these goofy people and all this stuff, right? And so I went to India in 2020, and he had that guy Diaper Baba dancing around. I've told these stories before. But I knew back then, before I found out about the Brighter Mind scam, before I found out about the RSS, before I found out about these real estate scams he's doing, and all this information about him doing things that are clear violations of the Sahaj Marg teachings and are unmasterly. This guy is a fallen person. He was given I saw the work that was done on him, but he's a fallen master. And so, I don't know, about a year later, I met my eventual wife. And there was this guy's, one of the nicest people, American people. There's a lot of nice Indians, but this American guy. One of the people I always thought was just one of the nicest people. him and his wife were prominent members of the system. And I told my, future wife, I connected them so she could get her individual sittings she was interested in starting. And she started with him, and eventually I got married to her and I moved to where she was. We were living together. We married and were living together in the area that she was with these preceptors. And these preceptors ended up spying on me, using my new wife's information to give to my ex-wife, so that she had, when we lived in, we moved from Nevada to Utah, and she found out our house online, and she was looking at the pictures of the house. So she was imagining, she was connecting with us. She was, not getting the divorce. She was delaying the divorce, even though she was living with a new guy, and, all just the manipulation and craziness that she exhibits, and just a nightmare. And, anytime the kids had contact with her, and my daughter Anna eventually would go live with her, and she would, from that moment, like I thought if Anna lived with me, because Anna said a number of times that, and again, she was always manipulative and lying, but she said that, like, I was preventing her from from committing suicide. But, I got to a point where I sat down and talked with Anna, and I told her, look, I'm going to have to bring you to a hospital. If I do that, the government's going to get involved. You're not going to like it. They're going to put you on a psychiatric hold. And you're not going to like it because she's anti-authority. And I'm like, they're going to, it's going to be rough. They're going to have, people there. They're going to, if they're going to medicate you, and you're not going to like it. And I don't know what to do. But I go, if we end up going to the hospital, they're going to do that. Then they're going to launch an investigation into our family. And, DSS might, they're arbitrary because I've worked with them before, might take the kids away. So you're putting the whole family at risk. And I'm like, I'm tapped out. Like, I'm just done, So this is right after the gathering. I'm like, you just got to stop cutting yourself. You got to figure out a way. I'll help you in whatever way possible. Let's strategize. Let's figure out, when you get triggered and how we can prevent this from happening. But, she kept on, I guess she was smoking cigarettes, and she had threatened her brothers and sisters not to tell. And then she couldn't get the cigarettes when we got back to America. And she was keeping a secret from me. And so she was coming off of that. It was bad, and I just couldn't, when she went to go visit my ex, I'm like, you guys stay there. She kind of wanted to stay there, and I just couldn't have her come back. Just couldn't do it. Right. And and it sucks because, she ended up, my youngest son went to visit my ex, and she didn't tell Anna about it because Anna was, going through whatever she's going through. And Anna found out that he was coming, and her mom was keeping it a secret because her mom was manipulative, and, they were both these victim conscious people. So she cut herself, and my older son came in, and it was really bad. She cut herself worse than normal, and she had to go to the hospital. And they locked her up in a psychiatric hold, just like I told her. And her mom had gone to the hospital similarly when she was that age. And so, she had been on a psychiatric hold before. And those things are rough. And they roughed her up. And she was never the same after that. And I guess eventually she got into drugs, and she was on LSD, and one of her friends had bought her a handgun, which I don't know anyone in the right mind would give someone like that a handgun. She shot herself. Which, and, I'm not blaming the mission for this. And, certainly she had some scars, and, our family situation, all of it, it's all there. But, they didn't help. You know what I mean? If this was inevitable, sure. But the mission and the organization and Daaji and his, cronies and these little bitch-ass, punk-ass dudes around him that are, undermining. These guys don't believe in the system. I'll talk about that in a bit. And so this preceptor couple used my new wife's information and told my old wife where we lived. And that was a clear violation. And eventually I contacted Kamlesh, and I told him this happened. And, he needed to pull their tickets. They should not be preceptors. In the age of information security, you can't be spying on people and picking sides and doing stuff like that. And I know how my ex can be manipulative, but, and that made me feel like we ended up not going to satsang.
And my new wife and my kids didn't get access to preceptors because they all were irate at these people for doing it. I talked to my kids, and my kids agreed with me. They didn't want my ex to know where we lived for a variety of reasons I'm not going to get into, but we all knew it was the right move. And my ex manipulated the situation to get preceptors to use private confidential data, which in the age of, this is a data leak, right? And I'm talking to people on my YouTube channel talking about heartfulness, and at that point I was still feeling transmission, but it was starting to dissipate, and I'm feeling conflicted because I don't trust Daaji, and I don't trust preceptors, and I don't trust the direction the organization's going, but I don't want my samskaras and my personal issues and the cleaning I'm going through. And again, I'm not a victim. I'm not saying I'm a victim of any of this. I'm telling you my experience with the mission, which had been great up into Daaji. And Daaji is, you can tell me whatever you want. You can blame me for whatever you want. But I'm telling you, I'm not a liar. And people know that. I've always had a problem. Not a problem, but telling the truth has always caused me problems in life. I don't feel comfortable lying, even from a young age. I don't like to lie to myself, and, I confront myself, and it's been some of the things that, have helped me on my abias. I don't like to lie to myself, and I don't like lying, and I know when I'm lying, and I don't, it makes me feel weak. And so, I'm not a liar. And, this is my story. It's subjective like all stories are. But everything I said happened the way it's happened. Whatever, misremembering some details here or there, whatever, sure. But, the general thing happened. And everyone has their side of the story. But, Daaji's proven to be a punk and, not be these aren't men. I don't look at these guys. I have no respect for them. Again, what they've done to the way he's disrespected his master and all the things I covered. But that information in itself, all right, you guys who are struggling with the mission, and a few of you have contacted me, that is what it is, right? But you don't want to give up the transmission, the cleaning, and you don't want to give up what you had under Chargy. And so you're stuck in this limbo, right? But, from that time at the gathering in 2016, the sittings got worse and worse, and the mission got worse and worse, to the point where by 2020, I was barely feeling anything. And the gathering we attended in Kana, and, there are people who felt the energy, but that wasn't because of Daaji or the gathering. It's because the divine hierarchy was there. Just because you're feeling the energy doesn't mean it's still coming from Daaji or it's still coming from heartfulness. And you might feel energy around Daaji because he's the president of the system, but he's disconnected himself from Chargy. He's undermined his relationship, all these things. And I covered this extensively in videos, and, that's neither here nor there. There has to be a solution. There has to be, if this system's going to be around for thousands upon thousands of years, as Babaji said in Whispers, and Chargy, echoed this in this last talk that people have been watching. If that's the case, then there has to be another way. And you can look at the playlist here and do the sittings. There's intensive sittings, 3 sittings in one day that, is a good cleaning. You can see if it works for you. But the idea has to be that you connect directly with the source. And, I did this by cutting myself free from the Heartfulness Cult and Daaji, all this stuff. And it's been a blessing. I got reinvigorated, rejuvenated, my practice. Everything got better. And again, it's not the same. It's as it is good when it was when Chargy was around, no. The one benefit is you have to take personal responsibility. You have to do more of this stuff, right? And that's great because people relied on the master too much. They relied on the master to, there's people that ask Chargy when they should brush their teeth, right? There was too much dependence, right? He micromanaged things because people suck so bad. But you can connect directly, and there has to be something available because, the heartfulness system is shit to bed, right? It's done. That means it's crapped out. Or it's a parasitic organization that's lost the essence of the thing. And Sahaj Marg has to be preserved and, yada, 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 or whatever. But there's also just you personally. And if you're not feeling connected, then there's a way. I mean, I found a way, and you have to ask for help from the divine hierarchy, from Babaji, from Charji, whatever, Lalaji, and you have to reach up and and you have to say like this isn't okay what he's doing, and there's another path, like a direct connection. And that's what we're doing here in Gratefulness, but it's not an organized thing. It's each person, applying these techniques to connect directly. There's no master, there's no leader, there's no anything. There's just each person who wants to receive transmission and cleaning using the tools, the videos and things to help them connect directly with the source. So that's that. So I want to get into the story of what just happened. I started it last night. I have an audio that I have to edit out one part because I'm not comfortable with something I said last night. But then I'll, continue this on. I'm going to put these things together here. And so, here we go. Okay. It's kind of, I don't know what time it is. It's almost 11 o'clock here on Thursday, February 22nd. I went through a whole thing today, the last couple of days, to do with these videos. I'm going to explain why I deleted them, the things that led up to them. But I want to say this because some of these things will just be, I'll remember what to say tomorrow in case I run out of gas here. In terms of, I get tired and it's not easier. It's harder for me to articulate things later on at night. I want to start with this part, the part that I worry that I'm not going to be able to articulate it and construct it the way that it just came to me when I was getting ready to, making the bed and getting all these things ready for the, the end of the day type stuff. I learned something from doing this, these videos here. Most of it was just redundant. Most of the stuff I already knew. Most of the stuff I'd already been through. I had a similar experience before, and I'll get into that. But what I learned this time, which I didn't know before, is that the Abhyasis, for the most part, with a few exceptions here or there, the Heartfulness Abhyasis got the master they deserved in Daaji. They never deserved Charji, and they didn't, they don't think they deserve Charji or Babaji or Lalaji, right? It's like somebody who marries above their station, and the person that loves them, their spouse, is fine with it. The spouse doesn't view it that way. There was a movie, I can't remember the exact title, but there was this geeky guy, and he married this beautiful blonde. He was dating this beautiful blonde girl, and he just never felt like he was on her level. And, he screwed it up because of that, right? Because he was viewing it like there was, that she was on a different stratosphere than he was. And the masters of Sahaj Marg system never felt that way about the Abhyasis. They were just there to serve. But people just don't think they deserve, and, the scumbaggery and the corruption and there's a lot of self-esteem issues in India, and there's just things to do there. I think they're just really comfortable with a scumbag as a master and the people running the system. And the purity of the Sahaj Marg system was just too much to rise up to. And the people in Europe and America, they're so suspicious of gurus, and they don't really want any part of an organization. So like, yeah, I told you, I knew it was too good to be true. Like they were like that, right? It's kind of sad, but it's kind of pathetic. But they all have a master they're comfortable with, right? There's an NF song called Happy, and it's about, him feeling uncomfortable when he's happy. There's a great, another song by the group Pearl Jam, in which it's about, a girl, it's about sexual abuse. And one of the lines is, she holds the hand that holds her down. I worked with abuse for a number of years. My ex was, abuse survivor, victim, really victim. And just all of that. And, people create that environment because they can't be happy. We were doing NFT tapping, this tapping by saying mantras. And I was working with this in a workbook. I wanted to include this, but I really couldn't get the thing to work. And we were thinking of mantras for her and, like this about living in a way where there wasn't financial issues or there wasn't, all these things that would hung around her whole life. And she couldn't do it. She couldn't feel comfortable tapping and having those feelings because she didn't feel like she'd, people get used to a certain kind of a lifestyle, right? I worked at this treatment center, and it was owned by a Catholic church, and it was all these uh, kids, who were some of them were from basically hellish environments, and there was a priest and his family owned like incredible cottage, and it's like owned private Salt Lake in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, like multi-million-dollar property, beautiful house, and he donated it to this place, and we had the opportunity to be able to stay there, and the kids got a taste of like this upper level lifestyle, and there was an African American guy that worked there, and we were talking about how great it was, and we got to the place, and he was like, I just feel uncomfortable here. If he lived in urban environments, and it was just not what he was accustomed to, right? And the kids themselves, they did all right in that situation, but there were times that they would be well behaved and they'd be going to home to see their family and be on home visits. And like the Friday night before the family came to pick them up, the Thursday night or Friday night, depending on the day the day before their family went to pick them up, they would act out and they would lose the visit. People are like that. They self-sabotage, and there's just a self-hatred there. And so, I realized that the egregore of the system was always pulling for a master like they have now, like a dysfunctional criminal, exploitive, stupid, manipulative. I mean, all the things, right? Not a real one. And Kamlesh himself, he had the opportunity to rise up. I mean, it's something I think he coveted and wanted. And he was a good Abhyasi, a good preceptor. He had the opportunity to rise up and be that kind of a master. But he didn't do it. Like he just couldn't do it. Like people, they just don't want that kind of level of purity, that level of, I mean, the fact that all these people fall out of the central region and the mind region. I mean, I'm not saying this in a way like I'm better than them or whatever, but, just observationally, they're all in denial of what I'm saying. Like they can't, I mean, they might hear it, but they won't understand it. Like I can see it within myself or whatever it is. Like I just said, all right, I'm not, I mean, I know what I am as a person, right? I'm not that great. I'm not that committed, but I am committed, and I do, love this system and the opportunity that's been afforded to me. And I have progressed. And I realized I wasn't going to be a Babaji or Charji or something like that. Like you just know, like, I mean, you know this when you're playing sports, and then you see that people are on a different kind of level than you are, and you just don't have the talent for it, right? And so I realized, okay, I'm not going to be like they are, but I could at least move forward. Like I can do my best, my level best, and that includes being lazy at times or being, whatever I am, in terms of, I can just go at my own pace, right? And, I'm a streak shooter, like playing basketball. Some days I'm great, some days I'm not so great. Some days I would hit every shot, some days I would hit no shots. So it was like something like that. And so I've accepted those things about myself and, all of these things, and just, still keep on, trucking along, keep on chugging along or whatever it is. And that's been important for me. But the majority of these people, they're real comfortable with the, abusive, manipulative, exploitive. I mean, there's just a level of self-esteem issues in that country of India, and a level of, I don't want to be a part of an organization, and I don't believe in hierarchical thinking in the Western world, and I don't want to have a guru and things like this. And so, I think everyone kind of breathed a sigh of relief when they realized that Kamlesh was a piece of boop, like they all kind of were happy with it. And it's been easier for them, right? Like, they're just, they have someone that's down to the level of the kind of guru that they think they deserve. And, there wasn't going to be anybody that could, I mean, Sharji was just the anomaly. Because Babaji and Lalaji, I mean, I don't know so much about Lalaji because we don't know that much about him. But I don't think either one of them, again, they would be incarnated and somewhat different in their personalities, but I don't think any of them could have done what Charji did. I mean, Babaji was, spiritually superior to Charji, sure, whatever. That means, I mean, that's something that's hard to evaluate. But Babaji was the most spiritual person that ever lived on planet Earth. He, advanced more than anybody. Lology's the catalyst and the first, the founder. But Chargy was able to run an organization. He was a brilliant businessman, and he was just great at all these things organizationally, and such a people person, and he was such a workaholic. He slept, he barely slept. Like he'd be up all night working and running the organization, and eventually, his body was breaking down, but he wasn't, he wasn't able to sustain something like this. It wasn't sustainable, no matter what. Just the growth of the mission, and there's just so many years you can do that, But all these people around him and all these people were assuming positions, all wanted to drag this thing down. It was too pure. It was too, efficient. It was too. They just wanted to drag it down. The whole that's the problem with people on planet Earth. They just want to degrade things and drag it down to a lower level. And so, this is what I realized. The next guy was effed no matter what. It wasn't Chargy's fault that he couldn't produce a quality master, because he really couldn't make somebody like himself. He could bring someone up to the central region and charge their spiritual points, but he couldn't create somebody like himself. And he was somewhat intimidating, so he kept these fools at bay. But, a new guy coming in wasn't going to be able to do that. And there was just a criminal element and a degraded element. And these people, if they end up listening to this, and I hope they don't, because that's the reason I deleted the videos, is I don't want any contact with any of these people. Because for a variety of reasons, but mostly because it negatively affects me. But if Daaji's listening to this, or the people around him are listening to this, you guys don't believe in Sahaj Marg. You don't get it. Even if you know things about the spiritual points, or this and that about the techniques and, ancient yogic stuff, you don't get it. You don't get what it is. You don't get what's happening in the world. You don't get the transition that needs to happen. And you don't get how important this is. And you don't believe in it. You don't believe, you just think it's just the same old BS that every religion says. Every religion has an apocalypse. Every religion has these different things that they say. And there's the things that they say, and then there's the way that they act, right? There's the principles, and there's the character qualities that they say they want to have. And then there's the actual behaviors and the, pedophile priests and the, all this stuff that goes with it, right? The scumbaggery. Every religion has these, exalted proclamations of behavior and, what this, the brand that they're trying to sell people. But deep down, it's corrupt, and the people suck, and and it's degraded, and it's cynical. And you guys are a bunch of punks. You're a bunch of cowards, and you failed the system. You failed all of us, because it's the only thing that I and other people believed in. And you could have done the scumbaggery anywhere else, right? But you didn't do that. You guys were all rich men, and you didn't have to wreck this thing. You didn't have to corrupt this. You didn't believe in the books. You didn't read the books. You didn't have faith. Whatever your little bitch asses thought about it. But you didn't have to bring this thing down. Maybe it's what God wanted. Maybe it's just something that's part of a plan, and, yada, yada, yada. That's great. But you personally didn't have to get involved. You personally didn't have to wreck something that, those of us who wanted it to be, a pure thing that looked, at this thing as a salvation for not only ourselves, but future generations of people. And you didn't have to degrade it. You didn't have to bring in your little bitch-ass scams and your little punk-ass, little whatever you're doing here, real estate thing, defrauding people. You're not men, and you're certainly not lions. And so, whatever you're, I don't know, whatever that is, right? But it isn't entirely their fault, or really their fault at all, because everyone else went along with it. I got bombarded by these ridiculously stupid comments, and, I'll describe this tomorrow. My wife's ready to go to bed, and I'll describe, just the kind of details of it. But what I received from this in terms of personal growth and my understanding of the mission is one, I'm really sure now that it's so toxic that in terms of any contact with the mission and having those people watch my videos or any of this stuff, it has a negative effect on me. It has a negative effect on my attitude, on my spiritual condition. It had a negative effect on my ability to produce videos, my regular videos and things like that. And I'll get into that more tomorrow. And that there isn't a solution here. And I said this a while back, but I really see it now. it's really hard to produce a master of quality. And, you know, there's no solution if the master craps out. Nobody anticipated this. Nobody. I mean, I don't know what the solution is. There might be a solution, but I don't have it. And I don't think anybody else does. We just can't conjure up a master, right? It isn't, like, I mean, isn't Michael Jordan or LeBron James or, any of these great basketball players, iconic basketball players that are superstars that are, there's always one of them, right? There's always somebody who can fill that role. And there's talented athletes coming from all over the globe. And yeah, it's an elite group of so many people. Just like there's always the best chess player or the best musician or great artist, there's always somebody that can fill those roles. Sometimes great leaders. I mean, it's hard to come by a great leader nowadays. But there's always people there's always going to be a president as long as there's a government. There's always going to be these things. But a master is something that, is a rare commodity. And, a quality master would have been okay in another era, but you needed somebody like a Chargy. There wasn't going to be two of them. There wasn't going to be somebody who had all the abilities he had. And like I said, him coming in new, these guys would have ate him alive. I mean, they came after him and poisoned him and tried to kill him. And, just when he assumed the position, and this was when the mission had less scumbags and less power and less people trying to corrupt it. So Chargy couldn't even replace himself. Like, if they cloned Chargy and he was a younger version of himself, he still would have, not been able to pull this off. It was an impossible situation. Not that I'm excusing Daaji for any of his behaviors and his, all these things. But, there's none of that, right? And so this thing was doomed. And, whatever that means as well, it was something that, wasn't going to survive another generation. And if there's a way to salvage it, I don't know. That's something that will have to happen beyond my ability to comprehend. And things are going to have to get reals down here in terms of, environmental issues, all these upheavals that Babaji talks about. It's going to have to be big time global changes to make this, people to rise up to it, right? And, we'll see what happens. I mean, some of us will, maybe I won't, at least not this lifetime. But there might be a solution that this thing's supposed to go on for generations, but it couldn't survive the way it was because people suck. And that was very evident to me in the last couple of days. I mean, I've known it for a while. I'll cover this tomorrow. I just wanted to get this part in before I forgot it. Okay, so that voiceover I just did yesterday. Today's Friday, February 23rd. I'm a little bit out of breath. I just got done going for a walk and working out. But I want to get through this thing. I feel pretty energized. It's probably another hour to go. I want to explain what happened yesterday and just a lot of thoughts I had around this thing. But just to continue what I was saying last night about the people that surround Daaji and Daaji himself. Like, it's this idea of this being a plan, this being part of destiny, and also human choice. And I don't want Daaji or any of those people or any people who are loyal to Daaji watching this video or any of my videos. I want to make that clear. I think I made it clear this morning in the beginning of this video, but I want to restate that. This isn't for you. There are people out there who aren't going to stick with Daaji. They're already gone. They're already given up. They don't believe in him. They lost faith. They're spiraling. They don't know what to do, but they're not sticking with him. They don't believe in him. They're never going to accept him. And there's lots of them. Some of them have contacted me. Some of them haven't. But I would say it's probably more than half the existing mission. And, we're people who wanted the purity of the system. There's something special about the system. And those of us who see it, those of us who feel it, there's the mundane cesspit of human life on planet Earth, and there's all that stuff. There's all these contaminated, corrupt, cynical aspects to human life, all kinds of systems that have been exploited. There's all kinds of different ways to make money and scam people and, run your, stupid little games and things like this, as I was saying. And, those of us who understand the value of the Sahaj Marg system, it needed to be kept pure, and you have defiled it. Daaji and his people. And again, like I hope they're not listening to this, but if you are, I'm doing you a service, right? I'm doing you a solid here because you've surrounded yourself with people like yourself, a bunch of, liars and yes men and, people who will never tell you the truth and can't see the truth for themselves. But for those of us who see it, what you've done here is an abomination, and it's never gonna be successful. Your failure is already, as soon as you chose to take this in the wrong direction, chose to go against the essence of the system. Only if your goal is to take down the system, only if your goal is that, you have a desire, an evil desire to defile something that's pure and destroy it. Yeah, if that's your goal, sure, you'll be successful. But if you think you're going to be a fake guru and you're going to run this religion and you're going to make this into something, some stupid religion where people, the essence of the thing is gone, but you can con people with, some revamped version of Babaji's teachings and, whatever, that ain't happening. Like Daaji doesn't have he just doesn't have the it factor. And, I've said this over and over again. People have said this, people on my YouTube channel, like almost 100% of them who've seen Daaji videos don't think of him as a potential guru and don't respect him, like him. They don't feel connected to him. And you'll find that across the board. There'll be a few stragglers on in India who are there for the wrong reasons. But true spiritual seekers are not going to look at this guy and start to, I'll get back into this because that's going to be important in the future, right, of this voiceover. In 2016, Daaji said something great at Babaji's birthday. It was one of his better moments where he said he was going to thank the volunteers, but then he said, why should I thank you? This is as much your mission as it is mine. And he's forgotten that. This is all of our mission. And those of us who wanted to keep it pure, those of us who valued the spiritual essence of the thing and knew that contaminating it and trying to dumb it down and make it like everything else would be a huge mistake and would destroy the system, the essence of it. We're on a higher ground than you are. We matter more than you do, regardless of your positions and power in the mission, regardless of your personal wealth and your feelings of superiority. All of us who value Sahaj Marg for what it is and its simplicity are more value to the system and more important than you are. And so you may have control of the organization, but the rest of us have to find a way. Because you're not it. You're blocking the system. You're blocking our access to the resources, the spiritual resources. And our connection with you, or your connection with us, or whatever you want to view it, is bringing us down. You're blocking those resources, especially Daaji. And so that has to be considered. Like, you might not want to believe that. You might want to lie to yourself. But that's reality. Like, that's what's went down here. And so to move on to why I deleted the videos. So the first part of this is, in Babaji's diary, there's a part where Lord Krishna, Krishna Vishnu, says to Babaji, that he's turning over control of the universe to Babaji. And what that means is there is a soul, like there are souls that in charge of the sun. There's a soul that's in charge of weather or in charge of, any number of things, right? There's spiritual energy behind everything. And there is a soul that's in charge of this realm, the material universe, 3D, the third dimensional reality, and all the things that are associated with it, all the worlds that correspond with it, right? There are subtle worlds and universes and planes of existence beyond this. But in this realm, including planet Earth, there is some being, some, divine soul that oversees everything. And according to Babaji's diary, that was Krishna. Now, Krishna was an avatar, was, a cosmic functionary, a god of preservation, Vishnu's soul. He's Vishnu. And Vishnu wasn't a homegrown person, like Babaji's homegrown. Babaji had a life as a beggar. He had a life as a lowly beggar. He had a life as Patanjali, where he was at 0.1, but he was a high developed yogi. But as Babaji, he went as far as anybody could go spiritually in this realm of existence, and he opened up new possibilities and developed a system to help other people, all people eventually jump up levels of spiritual attainment. And he did this on this planet Earth. And according to his diary, and I'm not saying you have to believe this, but if you're an Abhyasi, well, you should believe it. Either he's a liar, or he's delusional, or this happened, right? And so if Babaji's running the universe, and that's what we believe, those of us who do the system, and I'm not talking about newbies, people that this is an untested system. I'm talking about people who have done this for a while. And if you believe in the system, that's the teachings. And if Babaji's running the universe, I mean, he's, the guy, right? He's the guy. Then, why didn't he stop this thing with Daaji? I mean, they had plenty of time. Why didn't he, do something different, right? I mean, like he has those. Of course, we have freedom of choice here. But if he can't fix this, or he let it happen, or it's part of a plan, then who am I to do anything about it, right? Like in terms of the organization. And I can't. Like I said, I can't make a master. Let's say we had a master, right? We could, somehow there's some special soul out there who just excelled and became the master. The person would have to be Indian because the organization is mostly in India and there's prejudices there. They wouldn't accept anybody outside of India. And the person might even have to be the right caste. I mean, that's how crappy people are. That's how sucky people are. But let's say there's a person out there who could intercommune with Babaji and Lalaji and Charji and, all these divine souls. And the person could learn to make preceptors and could rise to that level. The person would then have to convince everybody that they're the master and somehow win legal authority in all these countries and, India, gain control of all these ashrams and things at a time when there's billions of dollars of property, right? The Khan ashram alone, and it's a worldwide organization. And it's known, and the powers that be and the evil people and money power have their claws into this thing. And Daaji's already sold off, some of they have these scams going on and, somebody pure of heart coming into the system and wanting to restore it to its original purity. I mean, think about when Babaji was made or named as Lalaji's successor, there was a couple hundred people, there was no property, there was no mission, there was no organization, there were no foreigners, there was no anything, no money, no anything. Just Lalaji's powers. And that was enough for people, these other yogis, highly developed spiritual people, to attack Babaji and try to will him to death and steal his powers. I mean, this is just, back in whatever it was, the 1950s or whatever, 40s. And then when Charji took over, there was one ashram, about 5,000 to 10,000 people. And a lot of those people were from southern India, where they favored Charji because him being a Brahmin, they spoke his language. And he had been secretary forever. And they tried to kill him and destroy him, and people didn't accept him. And he was appointed by the previous guy. And so let's say, whatever happens with Daaji and he gets removed in some way, there's no pathway that I can see where a legitimate master could rise up and, fight through the corruption and the evil people all trying to get a piece of this thing and, win people over in themselves. I mean, this day of age with, all the problems it's not conceivable to me. It might be able to happen, but it's beyond my ability to perceive. And there's probably lists of problems that I can't see. And so there's no fixing this thing, right? And there's no fixing Daaji. And even if Daaji could be fixed, he's already sold his soul to all these people around him. Like, there's no walking this thing back. And if Daaji could fix himself, he'd have to admit to his problems and, apologize and try to win people back. And that would undermine his position when he's already disliked and doesn't have much charisma and doesn't have much support. And the power and the money power behind him would then disappear. And so he can't even fix it, right? And certainly the people around him aren't going to fix it either. So this system, the organization is effed, right? It's completely effed because of all the things I've said and things I don't even know about. And, there's just layers of sucky people all along the way. And something to sort of forgive these people in or give Daaji a break about. I have the opportunity to host gatherings and put together an organization here for Gratefullness. And I'm unwilling to do it because I figure the exact same thing is going to happen. Even with me kind of knowing it, because people don't listen. People don't obey. People think they know more. and the same kind of thing would creep in, and it would happen probably relatively quickly. There'd be drama, and everyone wanting to do it their way, and I mean it's we've seen what happens, and so it's always on the people, and to create a better world, a better system, we get the leaders we deserve, like I said earlier, and so it's just not doable. And so when I made the videos originally, I knew this. There was no fixing the system. There's no anything. The reason I was making the videos for people who were struggling like me, before, as I went through this process, and they see that there's something gone awry, but they don't want to quit, all the things I said earlier. And so there are people like that. And for those people, I've given them a solution, at least a solution that worked for me, and they can try it or not or whatever it is. It's never going to be the same. We can't bring back Chargy. We're not going to have ashrams and things like this. I mean, and I don't even know. Like, we're not going to have an organization like we had before. But at least we can connect and receive the transmission and cleaning and, whatever that is, right? I don't know how it'll play out. I don't know how it'll go. And there can be lots of groups. It doesn't have to be one group. There can be people who get along and people are like-minded, as long as you adhere to the, to the principles and the teachings of the system, and you do what the masters want you to do, without external pressure. You just do it naturally. There's that. But until there's economic breakdown, until there's a collapse of the system and people are shook, people are rattled, people are fear-based, and they no longer have their addictions, and they've been slapped in the face by reality of their situation, and they, go back and beseech God, as Babaji said in that one Whispers message, beseeching God, right? Okay, here's the message anyway. I want to read this one. I was making this other video yesterday, and I'll get into that in just a second, but I wanted to read this message to, these stupid commenters. Again, they weren't going to listen to it, but whatever. Wednesday, February 28, 2001, 9 a.m. In a quarter of a century, the Earth will experience a major turbulence. So that's 25 years from 4 days from now. I mean, if that's exact to the day. If he's saying in about 25 years, which, whatever that means. But there it is. In a quarter of a century, let me make this bigger again. In a quarter of a century, the Earth will experience a major turbulence that will be beginning of a cycle which Earthmen will find very difficult to go through. Fire will literally beat down in certain parts of the world, whereas torrents of rain will pour over others. Cataclysms will follow one another for many long years, keeping men frightened. Many will turn toward a supreme God, beseeching his forgiveness. Forgiveness for more and more aberrant behaviors, as well for the maltreatment imposed on their nourishing earth, the mother. The failure to respect the elements will lead to the effects generating terror among the population at the end of the century. So that'll be 2099. In future ages, the present layout of the continents will be shattered. Maps will need revising, yet the creatures inhabiting this planet will have more than enough to do in order to survive, rather than dealing with those details. Adam, ATOM, will turn against man, who will not have been able to harness it, and its lightning power will be devastating. The time for punishment for such a conceit will take place as hard as it can, and man, paying for his ancestors' glaring mistakes, will suffer without having any control over the situation. The transformation of this planet must go through all these cataclysms in order to be effectively completed. Babaji. Now, I'm a firm believer in this because, I've seen it as a counselor, as a person who covers this on YouTube, as a person dealing with people in the comment section, as a person who goes to Walmart, who's been to India, or has been, and that is that people are not going to change on their own. That only real change will happen when things break down and they don't have the system, a system that's so easy to ignore God and feel safe, secure, all these things, and to ignore your soul and just go on an ego gratifying tour of the world and, just be an egocentric, demonic person. And so it's so easy to do that. And, there's no wonder it's creeped into the mission and, and all of the things that I've talked about. Like, it's not a mystery. And so, that's the big picture. So what do we do now? Like, we just have to keep this thing alive, and whatever's happened with Daaji's happened with Daaji. And if it's happened because of a plan, and I see no other valid explanation, either Sahaj Marg's a lie, or this is part of a plan. Because if this is the way it ends, then it's a joke, right? Like, it's a bad joke, and all of us are who believed in it and bought into it, so there's no reason to think that way, because that's just counterproductive, right? Like, it's either a joke or not, and if we can't, if we can't see it, the future, and we don't know what's going to happen, then none of us can really know. We can only go by our own experience and the efficacy of the system, and the system that's still working for those of us who have broken free from heartfulness. I don't know. Maybe some people in heartfulness, it's working in a different way. I don't know what that is, but certainly not through Daaji and these, the people running the show. And in that, in terms of what I'm doing here, my participation in this gratefulness movement, it's very limited. Like, I don't want to act like a normal preceptor. I certainly am not a master and not going to pretend to be one. And, it's not going to be an organization. I don't know how to pull off a gathering. I'm not social. I'm not a networker. I'm not a person that's even, I have social issues. I'm introverted, and I'm hard to approach, and I'm not the right guy for any of that kind of stuff. I'm good at making videos, and I'm good at doing what I do here. And that's about it. So I had this idea for a while that I should put everything I know into a series of videos or one video, so that people in the mission, and not that I felt like, given what I told you, the story earlier about being ostracized in that gathering with Daaji, I don't feel like I owe them or feel any connection with them. Like I said, when my family needed them, when I needed them, I needed help, I needed support, on a spiritual level, I got it. And I eventually got it on a material level, but it was from my YouTube community and not from my spiritual community. And again, not like I was some great participant or whatever it was, but, the way I was treated, and I'm not a victim, like I said, I benefited from this. And that's why I don't care when people say things. When people leave comments and all the spamming I got from people, I'll get into that too in a bit. I don't care about it. Like, I'm not asking for your opinion. I don't value your opinion. I think you guys are all weak and pathetic for allowing Daaji to do this and just lying to yourselves and sticking your head in the sand. And, you're not real Abhyasis. You're not real spiritual seekers. You're not real spiritual aspirants, right? You're people who, you're posers, you're pretenders. And all of us are that to some extent, but you guys are real posers and real pretenders. Because you never got it. You never got the essence. You never valued it. And you couldn't wait to wreck it. When I made the videos, I had limited expectations. And two people came forward. One wrote a comment and another sent me a message. I believe they were both women, both of whom were struggling with the mission, and both of them found value in my videos. No one else came forward. And there might have been people who were lurking who benefited. This is for the Abhyasi community. And I only did this because internally I felt like, they wanted me to do it, right? This stuff was in front of me. I had information that would be of value. I have a platform to deliver the information. And so I, begrudgingly made the videos. And then once I started making them, I kind of got sucked into it, and it started negatively affecting me. Because it just would. Like, the rest of the stuff I cover here, I can be detached from. But these videos and the stuff with Daaji, it's just always going to be a little bit painful, no matter how it goes, It's a loss of something. It's a death of what we remember as Sahaj Marg and Charji's legacy and all this stuff. I mean, it's a real bummer. And, I'm not bummed out like I was, but it's never going to be great. I always work to be grateful, and I'm grateful for it, but, it is what it is. But I made the videos, and, I made, I believe, 12 of them. And I was eager to get done. And so 2 days ago, I just released all the videos. There was 4 left that were unlisted. And I made a last video that was an introduction. I made that public, and then I released the other ones. And I felt relieved that I was free from it. Because, this happened before when I was talking in my Journey series. And I mentioned Daaji. I put Daaji in the title. I put Heartfulness in the title. and a lot of Abiasis, including Daaji, watched it. And when they were all focused on my videos and we were connected, I felt horrible. Like my energy was low, and it just negatively affected my spiritual condition. And, I desperately, it was like I was drowning in a sea of a cesspool, and I wanted to be free from these people. That's another reason why I didn't want to do the videos. And I'm just going to do this one to explain it all. And this is going to be whatever it is. But one of the videos was just a meme. And this is kind of where it gets interesting. It was, I made these various memes. I saved these clips for future use because I wanted to document them in case something like this, if I was going to do something like this, it should be documented, the fall of the system. And one of the memes, Daaji slams Chargy not wanting to be tested whispers. And that was just so I could fight, if I was searching for it, I know what it was, right? And that was sent to the preceptor, Rob. I put it up so he could see it because I told him about it, but he was not interested. And it was unlisted. And I sent him the link, and I never deleted it, which I just, I should have, but I never did. And so that was published by mistake. I thought that was part of the whole thing, right? I thought it was part of the whole playlist. And for whatever reason, it wasn't me talking at all. It was just Daaji telling this story about how Chargy received a Miss Whispers message on his birthday. And I made a follow-up video, and I showed that, the Whispers message they talked about didn't exist, and at least it isn't published in the archives, and, all of it. And people got upset with me, and I got about 40 comments. People were spamming me. People were encouraging other people to flag my videos and try to take my channel down and try to take the video down. And I got so many people said, change the word slams and, all this. And they descended on me like, it was similar to the thing that happened before. And I banned all of them, but it was just, at some point I was making this follow-up video yesterday, and I felt drained. And the video had 5,000 views, and then got another 1,000 views, and it was going around in India. And all those people were focused on me again, Daaji, all the people, the cronies, all those people. And I didn't like it because I don't want any contact with them. I mean, it's just, I can't have it. It's like, an abusive family, a cult, whatever. I just can't have contact with them. And so, the other part about it was that I got very few comments in my video. Very few comments from my normal viewers in my series, my video series, and very few supportive comments from Abiasis. Only 2 of existing Abiasis that didn't hear about Sahaj Marg from me or Heartfulness from me. People who were already doing the practice and they just happened to find my videos. And so, like I said, I got a long message from one person and a bunch of comments from another. But other than that, people were either lurking or they weren't benefiting. And I didn't want to make the series in the first place. And I desperately wanted to disconnect myself from the organization. And so then I found out, and I felt drained already. And I found out they gave me a copyright strike for the video, which was a real bitch move on their part. Just because I used the word slams, right? And, and I was like already over it. So I pulled all the videos for that reason because I just, I don't want them here. I don't want them over on this channel. I don't want any of these things. I thought about maybe republishing the videos, but I don't want a connection with them. Like I said, I don't feel I owe Abiasis anything. And the response to the videos were so unsupportive. I mean, there was 2 people that came forward, but other than that, people weren't digging the videos. And, it was hurting my ability to do other videos on my other channel because I put too much, I put so much into the videos. I didn't have time to keep up with my other channels and all these things. And so I was like, it's just, I want to cut myself free. I had the exact same experience before. I don't want to be part of them, and I don't want to have any relationship with them whatsoever. And I'm tired of watching Daaji fail. I was, one of my viewers, he left a comment. He was in Germany, and he searched for Heartfulness, and he found that Lady Gaga was quoted on the Germany Heartfulness website. And that's not Daaji's fault. That's just stupid people in Germany. But I found another website in Europe that said, 10 million people trust us. When are you going to get started? there's not 10 million people doing, and they just always lie, but I can include those in videos, but I could do this forever. Like every day Daaji fails, every day they do something that's not Sahaj Marg. And, I'm tired of covering it. I'm tired of watching the videos. I'm tired of, I don't care anymore. Like, I don't need to prove, if you can't see it, you can't see it. Like, what am I doing here, right? Like, I want freedom from, I just don't want to watch the videos. I'm over it completely. And I hope that doesn't change because I don't want to get sucked back in because it just sucks for me. It's, I don't need to think about Daaji. I don't need, it's, the organization is toast. Like there's no fixing it. Just like with my feelings about the system. Like it's, what Babaji said in the prophecies and in his My Vision chapter in Reality at Dawn. It's inevitable. The system has to collapse to give birth to something else, and that is heartfulness as well. Like heartfulness is a parasitic organization, and it has to be removed. But it isn't for me to remove it, right? These people who are threatening to spam me. They did this before. People were putting up what they said was poor quality videos on the internet, and they were harassing those people and sending out spam things. And I had a couple of videos that didn't have any of their materials in it, and they spammed me, and they kept on spamming me, and I contacted them. They had reached out to me before, and Mr. S got involved, and he sucked because he's just not smart, and he's just arrogant. But I told them, this was back when I was friendly and supportive of heartfulness. I was telling my viewers about it, and I made videos about it, and that they were spamming me, and they were the worst kind of spammers. But I could activate my viewers, many of whom would probably gladly do this, to go and get heartfulness videos and flag them, right? There's all kinds of things that they're doing that, they're running a cult there. And they're running scams and they're doing things. And, I could work to get this thing put on a cult list. I mean, if I just went south on them and I just went full Rambo on them and just, and made it my sole preoccupation to take it down, I could do it. I could hurt the organization, destroy its brand, and, do whatever I could to expose it for whatever it was, right? I mean, I could do the same thing that they're saying. And once they did that, I don't feel comfortable using my viewers like that, but I don't even want that kind of relationship, right? That's that's me still being in a relationship with them, right? I could do that, but it doesn't make a difference because, the system's already gone. It's just, it doesn't matter. It's not my job to take them down, right? If Babaji's running the universe, then he can, there must be another more organic way. Daaji could get busted or there could be a scandal. And, if he wanted to take him down, then it was just, it would just be taken down. And even if they take it down, then what's next, right? That still doesn't solve the problem that there's no, we need a master, we need a system that, the reason you need a master is when you have groups of people running an organization, it's worse than when you have one divine person, or at least a council of divine persons. But you need elevated souls, and they're hard to come by, which we are very, I've discussed at length. And so, the problem is there, and there's no easy fix to it. And my biggest thing is I don't want any relationship with them at all. I've said that before. I don't want to watch their videos. I don't want to hear about their stuff. And this guy's great. The Daaji Truther sent me the thing about Lady Gaga, and I sent him back a video where she said, I swear to Lucifer, all this weird stuff. She's just weird, whatever. But it's already, it's overkill. So what more do you need to realize the system's toast, right? I'm kind of happy about the way the videos came out, and it's some of my best work. But, I've done this stuff before, and I'm just, over it. I just don't want to, I don't want to be a part of it. I don't want to be a part of it. I don't want to be in their thoughts. I don't want them thinking about me. I don't want them, aware of me. I want them to forget about me. And I certainly want to forget about them. And just move forward and do my own abias and do my, the gratefulness stuff and, make that. It can just be a positive movement, that was born out of the debacle that's heartfulness, but I don't need to keep on talking about it, right? Because it's not necessary. Like it's not going to solve the problem, and it brings me down, like in a way that other stuff doesn't, because, like I said, this is something personal to me, and I'm never going to be psyched about what happened here. Like it's always going to sting a little bit to some extent, right? So that's the reason I pulled the videos. I just felt relief after I did it. And I'm like, I'm free from it. Same thing happened, like I said before, when I did the Journey series and I mentioned Daaji's name in the title. And like now I won't forget this feeling. Like whenever I've engaged with Daaji and the organization, it's brought me down. Like it doesn't lift me up. It doesn't make me connected to the divine within me. It just does the opposite. To me, the organization is toxic. It's a toxic cult. And all the people that have fallen in with him and are defending him and believe in it, like I have no respect for them. And I don't understand any of their, like and they're not my problem. Like we're not a part of the organization. We're not, I mean, just the fact that everybody and everything is my brother and sister. And but in the loosest terms, in the loosest possible terms of that, that's how I feel about it. Whenever there's a loss of something, whenever something was great or good and then it's not as good, it's always a bummer. When something's been contaminated, you remember how some great something was, and then you come back when you're an adult and you realize that it's been corrupted, and some of the great things that were, I mean, we all experience that now, and as older people that we go back and see some of the things that were there when we were younger people, and we see how corrupted it is now and how degraded it is, and how commercialized it is, and all these things. I mean, these bean counters, these money people always come in and find some way to wreck things and make them worse. I mean, we've seen this at YouTube. In the beginning, YouTube was like Wild Wild West, and it was a completely different vibe and things, and then it just became more and more corporate, and we made more and more political and more restrictive, and less financially beneficial, and less, suppressing, view counts and, all the things that YouTube has been. It's always like that. It always sucks when things get worse. It always sucks when they take things away from you that were better. And, I mean, that's always what it's going to be for Sahaj Marg and, what Daaji's done for Heartfulness. And, maybe someone at some time can, people can work to reclaim what it once was, and maybe it'll come back, and its glory days are ahead of it. I mean, that's what Babaji has said in whispers, and, I can see that happening, and, but a lot of things have to happen to make that a reality. So I think that's it. I just, this is my story, and, those of you who are struggling, this is how I've succeeded in breaking free from the Heartfulness cult, and I can report that it's been beneficial, and, it's a pathway and a choice other people can make. It's up to them. And it starts with praying to the divine masters and asking for guidance and seeing what you should do. And I don't know what that is, and I don't want to know. Like each person has to do it for themselves, and I don't know what people are still getting out of Heartfulness. I don't know if some people have to stick with it because, eventually things will turn and they need good people. I don't know. There are properties that have been charged, ashrams that have been charged with spiritual energy. It'd be ashamed if they get wrecked and contaminated and, they're not utilized for, I mean, they've been beneficial to me and so many other people. But again, that's out of my hands. Like I can't, the official president of the system is Daaji. He's been appointed by Charji, endorsed by Charji and Babaji, and the people around him, they have official positions, and I don't have anything. I'm not a part of the organization, and I don't want to be that. So I certainly aren't going to be the one that fixes it, and I hope that something does, and people come around, and and there's something that happens to change the direction of the tide. But I'm not going to hold my breath, and that's for. If that happens, great, then I'll revisit this, But otherwise, I'm going to do my own thing, and that thing is working and connecting directly to the source, and the master of the system is working, and it's working at least better than Heartfulness ever did. Okay, so that's it. If any of you guys made it through this that are pro-Daaji people and you haven't commented yet, don't comment. Like I said in the beginning, I said throughout, you shouldn't have watched the video. If you don't agree with it, that's fine, but this is my experience. I didn't make anything up. I didn't embellish it. I didn't want this to happen, clearly. Anybody who knows me or even, you can tell the sincerity of the story. I mean, this is how I got here. And it's been a blessing. In a bad situation, I feel like I've been blessed, and I've got cleaned out, and it's helped me, right? Having all those people turn on me and ostracize me has helped me incredibly in doing this work. It's made me, I don't want to say thick-skinned, but I'm oblivious to the criticism of these people. Like, I don't get offended. I don't care about it, right? Like, it's just, and what I have also realized is that getting any kind of external validation is worthless, because people come and they go, and they'll agree with you when they agree with you and turn on you when they don't. And all that stuff's been gifted by this experience, the experience with the organization. And so all of that's been a blessing. Like, it's made me have the ability that I can just say whatever I say is the truth here, and that's good enough for me. Like, I have to be feeling good about my own performance here and other parts in life. And if that's good, it's good. If I am satisfied, or I feel positively about my performance, there's always room for improvement. That's what matters. I don't need external validation. Although, like, getting the feedback I got from those videos, the feedback I got a bunch of like really stupid people with the inability to have abstract thought, and people didn't understand the videos, and people didn't understand the title, and people didn't, they're dodgy people who left comments, and the other people didn't, right? Like, it was a few people that claimed to benefit from the videos, which is great, but that was it, 2 people. And so, 2 people is great. It's more than none, right? But, I made about 30 hours of content to, it's not a valid return on my investment. And so, like, I'm done with all that. Like, like I said, like, I could release the video somewhere else, but, what's the point? I recognize this with dealing with sheeple. And again, majority of these people, they're all sheeple, right? They're not lions, and I'm not saying I'm a lion, but I'm certainly not a sheeple. And so they all just follow and line with the powers that be, and the group think and all these things, and they don't think for themselves, and and they got the master they deserve. Like, they all crave to have somebody, it's like sadomasochistic or whatever it is. They want to be punished, right? This is the people who cut themselves, right? All these things. People who want to, they want to be abused. They want to feel like a victim. They want to be, cucked or whatever. And so these are, there's lots of people like that, and that's what we have here. And just to repeat this last thought, which I shared at the, from last night, that one little segment I did last night, I did benefit from the idea that I can see that, just from the comments and the way that people have supported Daaji and all this stuff, that, and in just dealing with sheeple, but in this particular case, it's about Sahaj Marg and, Heartfulness Parasitic Organization, that the people got better master than they deserved in Chargy, and they really, it's like the people who, like I said earlier, who aren't happy when they're happy. People who want something to complain about, people who don't feel comfortable unless they're getting beaten down or getting screwed over, and, that's the majority of people. They don't feel safe in something that's as wonderful as the Sahaj Marg system. They're intimidated by, their potential. They're scared of their full potential. I recognized this early on, that we all have a fear of, like, the beast within, the dark side of ourselves, but we even more fear the potential saint. Our ego is terrified of our potential saint coming out. And, the ego will sabotage and, do anything in its power to make sure that the saint doesn't, run the show. Everyone's ego wants to run the show, and this is a clear reflection of that. That's why these people have embraced Daaji and this corrupt organization. And when something's pure, they immediately, the evil people come out and immediately try to contaminate it, which is sad, but that's where we're at. And so, we're just all waiting for the upheavals. And again, you guys interested in the Gratefullness stuff, the videos are there. Otherwise, all the best to you. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely pointing from the Apocalaughs and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.